6:40 here, wide awake by 3 a.m. I'm not boasting, right? I would rather be asleep until 7 a.m., but I usually can't sleep Saturday night, Sunday morning because I get so excited about doing this big weekly show. And I'm too excited for my own benefit because the voice doesn't lie, right? My voice is weaker because I didn't sleep. I am weaker. I am more teary. I am more vulnerable because I didn't sleep sufficiently. Couldn't sleep sufficiently because I'm just overly excited about doing this doggone show. Now, the Dodgers won last night. They've evened up the World Series at 1 game apiece. They'll be playing the next 3 games in Los Angeles. And why do I care? Well, I do. I came to America in 1977, and I spent much of the summer of 1977 in the stacks of the Pacific Union College Library. And I started off reading books on World War II. And then I transitioned to reading books on Weimar Germany because it sounded really sexy and exciting. Then I transitioned to reading Reader's Digest and all its back issues because I really liked its condensed versions of books on World War II. Then I started leafing through Life magazine, and I scrolled through all of Life magazine from its inception, I think in the 1930s until up to the present. Then I scrolled through all of Time magazine, and then all of Newsweek magazine, and then all of Sports Illustrated, which started in the 1950s. And the articles about the Dodgers and the articles about the Dallas Cowboys made them sound like good Christian teams. As I was the son of a Christian evangelist, I was raised within the high-intensity Protestant Seventh-day Adventist religion, rooting for and taking an interest in and becoming a supporter of the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Dallas Cowboys. That was like a logical extension from my Christian base. And then in 1980, Ronald Reagan came along, won an overwhelming victory, and loving Ronald Reagan and his conservative moral majority agenda, that also came fairly naturally for someone within a high-intensity Protestant religious upbringing. And I think this is how we typically tend to work. We rarely adopt beliefs that go in the opposite direction of our tendencies. We adopt new beliefs that are extensions of where we're already at. So anyway, I feel good. I feel happy about the Los Angeles Dodgers. And if you're not a sports fan, that doesn't make any sense. So Marc Halperin, my favorite political journalist, he has been expressing bewilderment all week on the two-way platform about why Democrats are so upset about Donald Trump's White House renovations. And I'm not bewildered at all because I recognize we can't help but invest ourselves in things outside of us. It's part of the evolutionary process that we all, every single form of life, naturally engages in niche construction. We all try to reshape the world around us to better align with the best interests of ourselves and of our group. And one way we do that is by investing ourselves into places and things and people and organizations and groups around us. And then any insult, any harm that falls to things that we love, right, that is felt just as viscerally as an assault on our person. So I remember when Dennis Prager would do his radio show on KBC, he once criticized, I think, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of New York City who went and visited the Central Park Five, who were accused of doing that horrible crime in Central Park in 1989. And Dennis Prager said this was a poor use of the Archbishop's time. He should have gone to visit people who are much more worthy rather than these horrible people who were accused of committing this horrible rape and beating of the female jogger. And I remember one Roman Catholic caught up and said, Dennis, when you criticize the Archbishop, right, I get viscerally upset because you're attacking, it feels like you're attacking me. And Dennis says, well, you need to think of the big picture. We can't take these things personally. We have to stand up for what's right and wrong. But Dennis Prager's individualist kind of buffered conception of the self, where you can just rationally decide what you get upset about, I don't think is quite equal to reality. Right? I loved my first car, and any injury to that car felt like an injury to me. And so when I pranged it, when I crashed it, when I drove it unwittingly into a parked school bus because I was busy changing the radio station on the dial in September of 1985, right, the damage I did to that VW felt like damage done to me, and I was never able to love the car the same way again. Right? I invested so much in that car, and then it got destroyed by my own poor driving, and I had to keep some distance from it going forward. So I want to run through some of Marc Halperin's commentary on Donald Trump's White House area renovations, his plans for new ballroom.
So yesterday, people started posting photos and video of the construction on the east wing of the White House. That's the building between the West Wing and the Treasury, where the first couple lives, where the First Lady has her offices. And you can see there, it looks like the worst construction site in your neighborhood. Just they've destroyed the White House. The president said something that some are interpreting as it wouldn't destroy anything, but they are. They're building a big ballroom. Now, I'm going to connect this story up with the poop story. Democrats are obsessed with.
So is there any group that consistently lies as much as real estate developers? Right. I think they've got to be pretty close to number one.
The video the president posted of himself pouring poop on the
sewage,
the sewage, whatever, the No King marchers. And I'll say, I'm just amazed at the capacity of the president to discombobulate people. Right. I don't need to give you examples of videos the Democrats have posted about the president, and the notion that like no Democrats ever done anything to change the White House. I mean, this whole thing, Dan. I'm not saying there's nothing to discuss about these two stories, but the number of emails I've gotten from Democrats in the last 2 days saying this is it, the sewage video. This is an all-time low for Donald Trump, or this construction thing should be the lead story. Am I missing something? These just seem like when there's serious matters to discuss, including things Donald Trump has done really questionable. I just can't imagine anyone getting too excited about these two things. Am I wrong?
The online meme, it's just silly, right? I mean, it's the way of the world now. People mock people online with, hilarious.
So we're driven by many things that you can describe as silly. And I think that there is utility in understanding people as rationally seeking their own best interests. We're evolutionary programmed to want to survive and to reproduce, but that doesn't mean that our emotions are going to be exactly calibrated to our particular moral hero system. So people have raw, unfiltered emotions all the time in my life. It's embarrassing how often I've been triggered and reacted in ways that very quickly regretted. I have a long history of teasing people and being sometimes crude and cruel and sarcastic in the things I said. And then there are times when people gave it right back to me and I couldn't handle it. In 7th grade, I walked out of class crying because other people decided to tease me, same way that I had teased them. And then I remember in high school, I published a book about how there were allegations that football players were receiving preferential treatment from teachers. And I got blowback for that. And so I went up to one of the football coaches who was also a teacher, and I said, I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid of the Beast Bunch, who are the football team's offensive line. And I remember first time I went to a secular school, Placer High School, 10th grade. It was the first time I got bullied, and there were these kids who were bullying me, and the main bully, like I went up to him while I was eating an apple, and I like crunched my apple right in his face. Then he and his friends like followed me around campus. I think they were calling me Apple Man. And then eventually he became one of my key sources in that story about football players receiving preferential treatment. But I've often, oh my God, some of the embarrassing long emails that I sent to Holly Randall and some other women that I was in love with. All right, we get invested in stuff and then we react in ways that may embarrass us.
Things, and if it's on your team, you think it's the funniest thing ever. If it's against you, it's an outrage. I think the one thing about the White House,
but just confirm for me, that's not one of the 50th worst things Trump's ever done, right?
No, not even in that day. No.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. Okay. I think on the White House construction, look, I think people renovate the White House. The ballroom, I actually kind of think it's probably a good idea in the long run.
Yeah.
I think where it does impact things is Trump said they were not going to touch the existing structure.
So he didn't say he didn't want to touch. There was a word he used, disrupt.
Right.
He didn't say touch.
He said they were not. Well, so no. Here's the bigger point. One of the things Democrats always complain about now is they can't trust Trump. They can't trust him to ultimately do the ACA. No, I know you're saying like I could give you 8,000 examples of when Trump misled, lied, whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, this is like Exhibit 9,000, but, I get it. It's just another example of, being misled, I guess, to be charitable. But, I mean, look, the ballroom at the end of the day is probably a good idea. I mean, Trump is right. Constantly putting the tent out there was silly. It people didn't like it. It was hot and humid in there sometimes, even though they had AC systems or heating systems. Great. Maybe the next White House or the next presidential inauguration is going to be in there.
Sean, what do the critics think they're going to do? Build a ballroom?
So I need you to be prepared. This standing desk might collapse at any minute and take my live stream with it. I have my strengths, but practical common sense. Checking the engines before the plane takes off, checking all the screws and bolts in my standing desk. These are not among my strong points. So I was up at 3 a.m., took a shower. Basically, this is the first time this has happened to me. For the next 4.5 hours, I was on and off ChatGPT. But I think I was only chatting with ChatGPT an hour of that time. So the rest of the time, I was blogging, making notes for this show. I was doing my positional release procedures, and then after about 4.5 hours, as I was eating my breakfast and writing a few more notes into ChatGPT, it said, we've been chatting a long time. Maybe you'd like to take a break. That's the first time that I've worn out my welcome with ChatGPT. And I just invested on Friday in the Pro version. All right, I am spending $200 a month on my ChatGPT subscription, $200 a month. But I do that for you, right? I'm here to create a place for you in the hope that one day, if I need a place for me, you might help me out. I understand that is sound evolutionary thinking. So I'm trad, right? I'm a convert to Orthodox Judaism. And even if you're not an Orthodox Jew, if you're a trad, if you're a traditional, if you're right wing, in all likelihood, you believe and you experience that the most important things in the world are outside of you, right? And I matter to the extent that I am part of something bigger than myself, right? I am a part of the American nation. I am a part of the Jewish people. I am a part of a traditional hero system that, from my perspective, combines the best of Americanism with the best of Orthodox Judaism. So that is the traditional porous identity. It understands what is most valuable is outside of us. Moral standards, people, meaning, purpose, duty, all right? The most important things in life are outside of me, and therefore my highest obligation is to live up to these external standards, and I will thrive or I will cover myself in shame according to my ability to live up to these external, to my perspective, objective standards that exist outside of me, right? That's traditional porous identity. Buffett identity understands that what is most important for the individual is what's inside of him. That's the capacity to choose your own meaning and your own morality. So because I am trad, I am porous, because I have a skeptical view of human nature, I recognize that people won't have 100% control over what triggers them in the moment, because in reality, we're all porous, meaning we're all vulnerable. So every time I've gone to interview someone, particularly in person, I learn that they're more vulnerable than I conceived of. I remember the only time I got to meet Tom Landry, interview Tom Landry. I didn't actually ask him any questions, I don't think. I just stood there as he was talking about Skip Bayless in December of 1985, and getting up close and personal with Tom Landry, I realized Tom Landry is more vulnerable than I conceived. So I often react to getting triggered by freezing, by crying, by fighting, by running away. Last week on this show, I was getting all teary about the Dallas Cowboys in the 1980s, right? These magnificent teams that went to 3 straight NFC championships but never got to the Super Bowl. These teams that were steadily declining in talent through the 1980s, but Tom Landry was scheming up risky ways to try to compete with teams that were more talented than the Cowboys. And I was getting teary thinking about the beautiful ball that Cowboys quarterback Danny White would throw. I was getting teary about his strut, his swagger, the confident way he carried himself despite losing some heartbreaking games, right? I didn't choose rashly to start crying on this stream last week. So I recognize to be human means you're going to have all sorts of things that render you vulnerable, that penetrate you, and you're going to have emotional reactions that are not 100% calibrated according to your rational conception of the world.
Without doing any construction? I don't understand this.
I have a different take, which is I actually think it's whether or not you like it or not is beside the point. But one of the things that
Yes, Tom Landry was wearing the hat. It was Tom Landry. The guy dominated my TV screen for 7 years.
I find fascinating is in Trump's second term, the imprint that he's making on, you'll have the ballroom, you've had the redecoration of the Oval Office, the
paving of the Rose Garden.
Right. Those are things. I mean, and the funny part about it, as much as people,
all presidents redecorate the White House. I mean, sorry, the Oval Office. Yeah.
Right. But I'm just saying, it's the actual physical changes that he's making. And Marc, to your point about the Rose Garden, these are going to be permanent. That will be things that forever are Trump's thing. But okay.
Well, I don't know about the Rose Garden.
I do, because I think here's the funny thing.
President Slotkin will put the grass back.
So when I was there the other day, as much as people whine, it was amazing how many people, because it was the first time for the Charlie Kirk presentation of the Medal of Freedom, the first non-Rose, like official event, non-Rose Garden Club. And it was funny because I'm standing there and everyone kept saying,
Sorry, I got to stop. I got to stop because there's a Truth Social post from the president.
Please read.
Apologize. Here we go. Numerous of our now great allies in the Middle East and areas surrounding the Middle East have explicitly and strongly, with great enthusiasm, informed me that they would welcome the opportunity at my request to go into Gaza with a heavy force and, quote, straighten out Hamas.
Yeah, count me quite skeptical on that score. Right? I don't think many nations want to send their armed forces to go straighten out Hamas. But some people cry over sport outcomes. Right? If you don't share a particular obsession, somebody's emotions will bewilder you. Marc Halperin's confusion shows that he must believe in the Buffett identity. He must believe that we're ultimately rational and transactional, that our outrage will scale with objective harm. But our internal physiological, moral, psychological, aesthetic systems do not work that way. Right? People don't defend and cry over principles. Right? They defend sacred symbols that embody their identity. Right? Donald Trump's prosecutions, his norm violations, his authoritarian gestures, right? They hit people's reasoning, but his ballroom hits their aesthetic soul. It mocks their self-image, their class code, their vision of what legitimate power looks and feels like. The decor, the lighting, the gilded excess, it's everything the elite's cultural immune system was trained to reject. It is vulgarity triumphing over refinement, chaos taking over the holy temple of the White House. So we operate not primarily on the basis of moral principles. We operate on the basis of sacred objects and extensions of ourselves, right? We pour ourselves and invest in flags, architecture, ceremony, diction, right? And so the emotional intensity of the reaction makes perfect sense to me. People are not carefully calculating the political impact of Donald Trump's ballroom. They are reacting to a felt desecration, right? So if you drop this expectation that everyone's going to be rationally calibrated, right? Nothing about this reaction is puzzling. It is biology meeting symbolism, right? So the same mechanism that might make me freeze or flare up when my extended self feels attacked is at play in these elite reactions. Right? The porous self is embedded in other people, other things, other objects. Its worth, its value depends on its integration with something greater than the self.
Like desecration.
Can we show Maria Shriver's? It's my favorite.
Yeah, show the Maria Shriver. But there was a New York Times reporter on CNN yesterday who was losing his mind. He's like, this breaks my heart. It infuriates me. Millions of dollars, not tax dollars, to build a new ballroom. Good God. I mean, this is what construction is. Yes, it's an historic building, but Dan, what is going on in the mind of the media and the Democratic Party that you're losing your mind, that this is like the symbolic apex of Trump's inhumanity? I don't know.
Well, I think so. First off, I wish the party would not focus so much on this. I fully agree with you, but the reason I think they're doing it is I think it is another symbol of kind of the lack of explanation, the misdirection, if you want to be charitable, or kind of outright lie about how much they were going to impact the building. And I just bear with me for a sec. When you stuff like Doge and the Venezuela attack and some of the immigration activities, to the party, it's just like, again, there's little explanation, and what was given does not appear to hold up.
Okay.
But again, it's a construction project.
But
and they're discussing this as though people are just carefully expected to be rationally calibrated in their reactions. So Ernest Becker, right? He wrote a book on death. He also wrote a book in 1971 called The Birth and Death of Meaning. He says this is what we look like in our extended selves, right? We can't help but overflow and extend ourselves into our niche, into our surroundings. We are like an amoeba. We push our pseudopods to our spouse, our children, our car, our flag, a crushed flower in a secret book, right? We are all huge invisible amoebas spread out over our niche, over the landscape, right? Our boundaries are very far from ourselves, our own center, our own home base, right? Tear and burn the flag. Find and destroy the flower in the book. And the amoeba screams with soul-searing pain. Now, we usually extend these pseudopods of ourselves not only to things that we hold dear and sacred, but also to silly things, right? We are cluttered up with all sorts of things that we don't need, artificial things, debilitating things, right? You will extend yourself into your apartment building, to your house, to the inventory of an interior decorating program. You'll get viscerally, vitally upset by a piece of wallpaper that bulges, a shelf that does not join, a light fixture that isn't right. You will see people breaking out into violent arguments and crying and screaming over a panel that doesn't match. Right? People will have nervous breakdowns while redecorating. You'll see a grown man crying in the street in his mother's arms because there is now a small dent in the bumper of his Ferrari. Now, we call people strong if they can withdraw themselves, from all these trifling parts of their identity, or from the important ones. Those who say, oh, it's only a scratch on a Ferrari, or that uneven wall is not me, that's just a wood crack, it's not me, right? Those people who can disentangle themselves from these kind of damages and ravages, we call these people strong because we attribute to them essentially that they have the buffered identity, which is a fiction, a useful fiction, but it's not how the world works.
But let me ask you a serious question. I study this. I don't know the answer. Why are people on your party and the media so emotional about it? If you want to say they're violating the rules about doing construction, we're going to sue them, whatever. But why are they so emotional? Why are they acting like he's I can't even come up with the metaphor. Why is there so much emotion about it? They love the East Wing so much?
I think unlike those other things which are a little more amorphous, that's a physical structure that's like people associate with, right? So to them, it's like a clear, I see the physical structure and I see the demolition. I'm just saying again.
I know. I mean, that was the reaction.
I talked to my own family.
All these guys.
Like
when I flew to Israel in 2000, it would be my second time in Israel. I first there when I was age 4 in 1970. I wanted to cry and kiss the ground when I landed in Israel.
God,
I read these quotes from these academics, from the reporters. Objective reporters are like they're like saying words like desecration. And they're so emotional about it.
Bro, that's their lived experience.
I understand.
By the way, the irony of this, by the way, A, it's being privately financed. 2, the benefit of it is going to be largely to the next president and future presidents, not Trump himself. I mean, I can't.
Except he's going to name it after himself, and then the next president.
So, in the elite, secularly educated part of the population, there's this idea that they can have a disengaged, buffered identity, that they can be disengaged strategic agents maneuvering their way within a neutral environment denuded of cosmic significance. But that is not how we operate, right? We are constantly pouring ourselves into things outside of ourselves. You can't help but do that. That's just part of niche construction that every living thing engages in, right? We can try to hold up a disengaged and buffered identity and, it's just a scratch on a Ferrari. But that isn't how the real world works. That's not how we live. We are not strategic agents in real life. Our planning and our calculation, right, isn't always so powerful, right? So we're constantly extending ourselves into the world around us. And we don't just look out on an external world and see it as being outside of us, right? We're constantly investing ourselves into the real world. Now, how is this to our advantage, right? This amoeba self is an adaptive mechanism, right? We're continually extending ourselves to possessions, to symbols, to allies, because this improves our survival. we're a social species. We depend on each other. We treat other things and other people as extensions of ourselves, the family, vital tools, shelter, territory, tribe, because by extending ourselves, we're more likely to tap into protection, maintenance, and to be able to transmit that which is precious to us, right? We have a brain that feels injury to violations of things outside of ourselves, because these things outside of ourselves are vital to our survival, right? When your spear breaks, when your kin are insulted, right, that endangers your ability to eat and to survive, and it damages your standing, your status within the group, which reduces your power and your ability to get resources, right? So we have an emotional system that has evolved to treat things outside of ourselves as part of ourselves, right? Mismatched wallpaper will very likely trigger the same kind of primal threat circuitry as the loss of a spear or the loss of a cave, as simply an assault on one's own body. That's why all these trivial damages feel existential, because they activate this ancient boundary defense of the self. Right? Our nervous system cannot fully tell the difference between that which I value outside of myself and my own body. So this outrage over Trump's ballroom is not about chandeliers or marble. It's about these violated pseudopods that we can't help but invest in things outside of ourselves. So for a certain part of the elite, this White House, presidential decorum, certain aesthetic codes are extension of themselves, what is most precious to them, their moral and cultural self. They're invested in their identity in these symbolic forms of order and belief that authority and the presidency and the White House should look and sound a certain way. Donald Trump's ballroom rips right through that self. It's garish, it's nouveau riche, it's emotionally loud, it's indifferent to their tastes and their hierarchy. So for our elite, this is ugly, it's desecration. Right? People experience damage to that which they symbolically value as damage to themselves, because these symbols have historically protected and preserved social order and status. When someone mocks or trashes that which we hold as sacred, right? Someone hurts a Torah scroll, that hurts me. It feels like an attack on myself, on the moral fabric that gives my life meaning and purpose. And so my whole nervous system reacts to an attack on a Torah scroll as if it's an attack on my body. So you can say, oh, this rage is not rational in the political sense, but it is defensive in the biological sense, right? We must have a hero system to live by. It's essential. It's a biological necessity.
And he never said, I'm going to basically demolish the East Wing. I mean, he didn't say
that. Not demolishing. It's taking the facade.
They're rebuilding it. They're rebuilding it. All right. Sean. John Sununu, former senator, wants to be the next senator from New Hampshire. He's got a primary against Scott Brown as of now, and then he's running against the Democrats.
Trump has been talking about building this ballroom for a long time. This isn't a surprise at all. But the reason why I think it's getting this reaction, it does go to what Stephen is saying. There is something about this where with one picture, you're able to tell a story, even if it's not true. It's the optics of that photo. And they say, as you were saying, Marc, it's a metaphor for him destroying democracy, destroying the people's house. And I don't think it sells. The majority of Americans are going to look at this and just roll their eyes once again. And to your point, Marc, there are plenty of presidential norms that he breaks. This is not one of them.
Yeah. Stephen, I think you just misspoke, because I know you know, but just to clarify, it's not the East Room, it's the East Wing.
East Wing.
The East Room, where people have seen many presidential events, that's not being destroyed. That's in the main residence building. Is that what that building's called? It's where the residence is, but I don't know what that building's called.
It's called the Residence.
The Residence. Okay. This is to the east of that. This is the thing that's being taken down. The destroyed makes me crazy. It's taking.
So to use Christian language, something that situates me in reality and provides a feeling of strength and a powerful narrative, a powerful life conception for me, is this idea that God is in his heaven. That in the final analysis, God runs the world. God runs the universe. God gave us an objective system of morality that can be found in the Torah, that the Jews are God's chosen people, that God acts in history, right? These are all essential to how I view the world, and any assault on these sacred principles, right? That feels like an assault on me, because I derive comfort and strength from the notion that God is in heaven and God runs the universe.
Being taken down is between the residence, where the East Room is, the map room. What else is in that thing? that big hallway, whatever that's called.
The blue room.
The blue room, right? So that building is the residence. That's between the West Wing and the East Wing. And the East Wing.
So my conception is that marriage can only be between one man and one woman. Anything else, right, is not marriage from the perspective of my hero system. From the perspective of my hero system, football and baseball and basketball and golf, that these are all endeavors that are carried out at the highest levels by heterosexuals, right? I have this bias that there are certain domains that are dominantly heterosexual, then there are other domains that are disproportionately homosexual, and that's part of how I see the universe. And so the introduction of same-sex marriage is disorienting to me, because I come from this traditional hero system that marriage is only between a man and a woman. So when culture redefines male and female, when it redefines marriage, right, when it redefines moral hierarchies away from the traditional model, this is not just some kind of mere policy change, right? For me, it's a psychic wound, right? My map of reality has been torn up, and we're all wired to feel this level of alarm when our shared symbolic order that holds our tribe together begins to disintegrate, right? Confusion over sex roles and alliances and what constitutes marriage and family, right? This is frightening from a traditional perspective. Celebrating trans visibility and same-sex marriage, right, is frightening from a trad perspective, right? Conservatives tend to view certain domains of life as expected to be heterosexual, right? Conservatives and Republicans are not upset that there is a gay man who's Secretary of the Treasury, but they would not be cool if there was a gay man who was the Secretary of War, right? Finance is abstract. It's transactional. It's not embodied. It deals with numbers, contracts, and markets, right? This is territory that does not map as easily onto our primal codes of strength, protection, and reproductive hierarchy. A gay Secretary of the Treasury does not disturb the right-wing conservative nervous system. It doesn't touch the symbolic body of heterosexual masculinity. But the Department of War sits at the center of that body, right? It represents the tribe's capacity for violence, protection, dominance, right? This is the evolutionary heart of male coalition behavior. And so from a right-wing perspective, a trad perspective, right, this domain must remain as coded as heterosexual, disciplined, and stoic, right? A gay man leading this would feel to a trad like a symbolic castration, right? This is not about reasoned policy preferences. This is all about deep pattern recognition, right? What roles, activate the ancient scripts of the warrior band versus the merchant class?
Wing is between the residence and the Treasury. Probably should have a map. Okay, here is the New York Times headline number 10. The New York Times is leading the way in saying that this is a metaphor and just what Mamdani would call a shanda. That's a joke. A
metaphor, a simile, a narrative, a symbol. These are not inherently less than things that are physical.
Number 10, please. Demolishing the entire East Wing to make room for his ballroom. Trump initially said the construction of the White House would not touch the East Wing or, quote, interfere with the current building. Well, it's not interfering with it, it's eliminating it. Now, he's gone back on his word, and he's taken down an entire part of the White House. But again, as Beverly said, this is not usual and also not unusual. And also, again, these are not. There's nothing in the East Wing any of you have ever associated with the history of the building. I'm quite certain of that. Okay, now here's video. This is going to be number 12. This is the aftermath after President Trump bombed an orphanage on purpose. No, this is the demolition of the East Wing, number 12. But it's this kind of imagery that's making people. Is it 12 that I want? No, I want 12. Look at that. This is democracy being destroyed by cranes. This is a metaphor, and I don't understand it. Yeah, they're taking down the East Wing, and he said they wouldn't, and now they are. And no real person could possibly care about this.
Pretty shocked here that a real estate developer would lie.
Now, I will say part of what's driving this story is this is compelling. This is giant construction equipment on the grounds of the White House, and they're taking down a building that's part of the White House complex. I get why it's that helps drive it, but the breathlessness. Now, here's the president of the United States, who spoiler alert, agrees with me about how nuts the reaction is. Here he is talking in the Oval Office today about, no surprise, the finest ballroom ever built by man or beast. Number 13, please.
Certain areas are being left. We determined that after really a tremendous amount of study with some of the best architects in the world, we determined that really knocking it down, trying to use a little section. You know, the East Wing was not much. There was not much left from the original. It was, over the course of 100 years, it was changed. The columns were removed, and it was a much different building. Then a story was added on in 1948, 1949. There was a story added on, which was not particularly nice. And the building was very, very much changed from what it was originally. It was never thought of as being much. It was a very small building. And rather than allowing that to hurt a very expensive, beautiful building that, frankly, they've been after for years, you have that. I brought these along so people could see, but it's, you know, there's a relative, nobody's actually seen anything quite like it. I think it'll be one of the great ballrooms anywhere in the world. It's about $300 million. It's set to do many, many things, including meetings of foreign leaders, including the honoring of foreign leaders. You can see this. This is a plan. It's got tables so that you honor a foreign leader. We have a proper space. Right now, we have a space that with tables holds about 79 people. And this is a proper kind of a thing. Now, what the White House was doing, as you know, is they were putting tents out on the lawn. This is an interior shot of the ballroom. I think there'll be nothing like it. And it's being paid for 100% by me and some friends of mine, donors to it. The government's paying absolutely nothing.
Okay.
So a lot of people get their meaning in life in part from politics, right? From these symbols. And we can't help but invest ourselves in the wider world. And we have a yearning for transcendence, right? How do you touch the face of God? In Christianity, there's a fairly simple message. There are fairly easy ways to get access to God. God has been rendered flesh. And so from a Jewish perspective, like Christianity seems to be filled with easy spiritual highs or cheap grace. Now, if you practice Orthodox Judaism, outside of Hasidic Judaism, you really have to work for your spiritual highs. In Christianity, there's this notion that everyone should come to God as a little child. There's nothing like that in Judaism. And usually the most reliable way to get your spiritual highs in Judaism comes from the very hard intellectual work of studying Torah. And then Christianity, Islam, spiritual highs are more accessible. And then for secular people, their easiest paths to transcendence are through embedding themselves in a sports team, in enjoying music, popular culture, enjoying romance, sex, and drugs, alcohol, meditation. So I asked ChatGPT to list the healthy, popular ways that Americans experience God or experience transcendence, ranked from the easiest to the hardest. So about the easiest ways to touch the transcendent are music and live performance, sports participation or fandom, spending time in nature, romantic love and deep friendship, creative immersion in art, writing, design, in service to others, meditation, group rituals, worship, 12-step and recovery communities, deep therapy and emotional surrender, parenting, solitude, contemplation, retreat, and the mystical experience of ego dissolution. Now, I have lived my life, and you'll notice this trajectory on my live stream is a little bit of an intellectual gigolo, right? I find myself falling in love with every beautiful new idea that comes along, ultimately not necessarily staying loyal to any. And this has been absolute hell on my friendships and on my social life. Right? When I converted to Judaism, most of my former friends from my Seventh-day Adventist upbringing, they wanted nothing to do with me because it was though I was urinating on everything that they held sacred. When I stopped being a Dennis Prager fan, right, my friends from the world of Dennis Prager wanted nothing to do with me. Every time I've made this big ideological shift, right, I've lost friends. When I get passionate about something, right, people find it annoying. And if I'm overly passionate or just disproportionately intense in defense of my new enthusiasm, I grate on people. And these losses are very painful. So when I hear people like Dennis Prager say they have never lost a friend, I think, wow, that's amazing. And I'm guessing if you have a lot of status, right? If you have formidable resources, people will be much more tolerant of your shifts. Perhaps if you don't change on anything significant, that puts less stress on your ties and on your friendships. The more you have in common with other people, the stronger your ties, right? People will forgive your ideological shifts more easily. The more formidable you are, the more status you have, the more charisma, the more resources, right? You have, the more that you can do to help people. But when you make ideological changes, right, it is costly to your relationships, right? Shared belief is social glue, right? The moment you stop affirming the shared creed, whether religion, political, cultural, you're implicitly rejecting not just ideas, but the people whose identity is built around these ideas, and that will always feel like betrayal. So it's hard to change and keep your social circle and your friends. And perhaps the best explanatory theory for this is called balance theory, right? We want to be in balance with the people in our life. The more we have in common, the more things that we like and love, right? The better, the more balance we will feel in our relationship. The more unstable we are with regard to the things that we have in common, the more imbalance and the more tension, and either one person has to change their mind or just shut up. Otherwise, people will drift and fall apart.
Also working with
now Stephen pointed out private funding is open, but separate from that, the president's point is, and you guys will remember, he proposed this to David Axelrod when Barack Obama was president. He said there should be a proper ballroom at the White House. At that point, he wasn't president, and even he didn't think he'd be president. He said, "I'll fund it. America needs a proper ballroom at the White House," and so he's long thought that this was something the United States should have. And now hopefully it'll be built and be great. But thank you both for trying to clear it up. I confess, no fault of yours, just my thick head. I still do not understand the reaction to this thing.
Mark, I think I just remembered, if memory serves, I think the White House movie theater is in that East Wing portion. So maybe that's what people are upset about.
No, the movie theater's in... Is it? Oh, you know what? You might be right. You might be right. You might be right. Yeah. Okay, good point. And that's something people associate with the White House. But having been in the screening room, it's not some historic space.
By the way, I have a new slogan. Democracy dies in demolition.
There you go. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Michael, make that the headline of the newsletter tonight. All right. Thank you both for that. And again, I welcome 100 questions about this when we get to your questions, because anybody who can explain this to me, I'm grateful. Okay, I'm going to run through some stuff, and then there's a thing right up Beverly's alley that I want to play.
So Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, announced in February that he was changing the direction of the Washington Post op-ed page. It says that now the op-ed page will support two pillars: personal liberty and free markets. And so the longtime opinion editor David Shipley moved out, and the page started to sound a lot more like Reason Magazine meets The Economist, right? It tends to be libertarian, technocratic, and cautious about populism from either side. And this weekend, the Washington Post came out in favor of this new White House ballroom, right? This new Washington Post opinion line is not viscerally, instinctively anti-Trump. It has shifted. So it's just part of Trump's cowering of all sorts of major American institutions that are increasingly aligning with him, bending the knee, or dialing back their opposition. Such a dramatic change from his first term. So I've been playing these two-way excerpts in order. I think I began with an excerpt from Wednesday. So now we're on to, I think, Thursday afternoon.
Strategy and tactics, very sophisticated group. And then many were in tears over the building of the White House ballroom. So we'll talk about those topics and more this morning on the morning meeting. Welcome, everyone. This is our morning meeting. Dan Shaw and friends talking about the ballroom and the reaction to the destruction, the wanton destruction of the White House orphanage. They tore down the orphanage.
The more you love, the more you're going to be vulnerable, right? You will inevitably become invested in things outside of yourself that will make no sense to many other people.
They didn't even give the orphans ample time to get out of there.
There was a bald eagle in there too. There was a bald eagle, a nest of them.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen,
misdirect.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will be talking about the White House ballroom pretty much all day, including my monologue on Next Up, because I remain confounded by how emotional people are of the tearing down of the East Wing. I'm not being critical. I'm just confounded.
I'm with you. I literally was starting to write my Friday column already, and I'm writing it entirely about the ballroom and using clip after clip after clip of.
I think you guys are missing. I think you guys are missing the mark a little bit on that. But
please explain.
Okay, happy to have you.
I think it is. I think one of the biggest issues with it is the fact that he outright lied about touching the building. Marc, you're rolling your eyes, but it's like so many other things.
But Dan, that's my point. It is like so many other things that he's lied about. He lies about things of massive consequence. Right. And they're not and they don't get as emotional about that as they are of the
because
pictures.
People don't have a connection to an individual going to a jail in the Congo or sending somebody,
But they have a deep connection to the East Wing?
Yeah, because the White House is an American institution. Like, everybody looks at it. Everyone has their own kind of connotation with that building. Again, I think it's an overreaction, but I do get the symbolism of one of the great, literally, pillars of the country, the White House, right? And he did. He lied. He lied. We all agree about it. He lied, right? He is funding it with. We heard yesterday that part of Google's settlement with him was $22 million to this. Again, if Kamala Harris was doing this, certain networks would explode.
I don't want
they are, just to be clear.
Yes, they are on the other side.
I don't want to toot my own horn, and I don't want to jinx myself, but my monologue is going to be a barn burner. Wait till you see what I have to say about that.
So if you're not a Dallas Cowboy fan, the YouTube channel, The Logical Cowboy, probably won't move you. But I love the videos on this channel, right? And one of them that was very moving to me, and I started verging on tears last week when thinking about it, a video here on a deeper look into Tom Landry's 40 defense, the mad scientist, warning excessive contact.
Tom Landry was an absolute menace in the blitzing defense.
They outmanned, then overwhelmed the pocket. They all came. Link, Scale, Thurman, Bates, Downs, Fellows, Scott, Rohr, Hegman, and Blockhart.
I think the mad scientist was on overdrive at this point.
Right, when I watch this video, right, I get emotional.
In the 70s, Landry was the heroic coach who did things the old way. He didn't believe in chaotic defenses, and he wasn't that aggressive at blitzing the quarterback. But in the 80s, he was Landry the Dark Lord.
And now has to go face the wrath of Landry.
The 70s Landry reminds me of Superman. Superman is the greatest hero in all of DC. But what made him great was his morality and his laid-back character. That is exactly what Landry was in the 70s. But the 80s was different. Landry reminded me in the 80s of an evil scientist who wanted nothing but chaos and mayhem. Can you imagine a Superman who was on full assaults without any...
I mean, they would send like 7 rushes after the quarterback at time.
remorse? There would be no capsule to his power. No limitations, no boundaries. In the 80s, Landry was that version. You have to understand that the 80s was the beginning of the modern day evolution of the passing game. Concepts like the Air Coryell.
When he came to the Cardinals in '73 from San Diego State, he brought with him a passing game that the league had not seen before. And Don Coryell single-handedly opened up the National Football League.
The West Coast offense, the run and shoot offenses of the West.
Ernest Gibbons, he's got him in the corner of the end zone. Touchdown, Houston.
Landry shotgun spread. These were concepts that were in the league for years, but the 80s institutionalized it. These concepts became a staple of most teams' offenses. I can picture Landry in some kind of science lab in a cave somewhere, trying to formulate the right formula to deal with the passing offenses, much like he did in the 50s with his version of the 43 defense.
As we moved into the 60s, the offenses were able to influence the 4-3 and keep us from doing the things we did in the 50s.
And in the 60s with his version of the flex defense to stop Vince Lombardi's run-to-daylight strategy. Landry had to innovate.
Well, the biggest thing that they do is that 4-0 defense at the Cowboys.
Right, the 4-0 defense is 4 down linemen and then using Bill Bates, undersized safety, as essentially your one middle linebacker.
Boys use, that's one where they have 4 defensive linemen, no linebackers, and 7 defensive backs.
He created his version of the blitzing nickel defense. He called it the 40 defense. 4 defensive linemen, but no linebackers. Bill Bates and Michael Downs were the key defenders in this scheme.
So Bill Bates was undrafted, right? He was slow, but he entered the league, I think, at 83, and he played through the 96 season. He had an incredible career.
For these last few years, I've watched almost every single game of the 80s Dallas Cowboys, and I gotta admit, I felt sorry for some of these quarterbacks. The 80s was already a brutal league, but when Landry came with that 40 defense, it just changed everything. This was a game versus the Packers in 1984.
Now what Forrest Gregg feels is it's not those guys, it's not the quarterback, but doggone it, to throw the ball, you have to protect the quarterback, and his offensive line hasn't been doing the job, and so he's starting 2 new guards today.
Landry dialed up blitzes all evening.
And here comes the blitz back down.
To me, although Bates was the GOAT blitzer, outside of Ed Reed, Michael Downs was able to time the snap on a blitz probably better than any defensive back I've ever seen.
So as the 1980s move on, the Cowboys face more and more of a talent gap with the rest of the league, and so they have to gamble more, use more innovative schemes to try to steal some games, like they did in 1986. In the second game of that season, they defeated the eventual Super Bowl champion New York Giants, who went on to a 14-2 record, but with this gambling, aggressive defense, right? They stole a game from the best team in the league. If you're not a Cowboys fan, right, if you're not an NFL fan, then this means nothing. Just like if you are not a big fan of the White House complex, right, you don't get this pain over the president destroying the White House.
And it destroys White House.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
no,
Dan,
I agree.
Dan, I should frame it that way and not roll my eyes. Just what Sean said. Everything you said was right on point, totally. But that's not what they're doing. They're talking about.
Promote the New York Times very often, and I don't promote Jim Acosta, but please go watch his video because it's so beautiful watching him melt down. Like, he's like, democracy is being destroyed. Like, that's maybe the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. From kings to ballrooms.
Yeah, I think the ballroom situation is a very hyper online issue. I mean, it's not something that's actually ever going to break through to the average voter, and I don't think that's what the goal is. For me, the problem with the whole ballroom situation is that Trump lied. Right, he said
it's hilarious that Nina Tenden and other Democratic elites think that the Trump ballroom story will change the midterm elections.
3 months ago that it wasn't going to touch the existing structure of the White House. Now you see images of the existing structure of the White House literally being demolished. So that is what I cover: the fact that the president of the United States is lying to the American people.
Yeah. Aaron, let me push back.
So I think this guy here is modern Orthodox and left-wing politically. This guy here, modern Orthodox and right-wing politically.
On that, and again, Trump lies all the time. He lies more than any president we've ever had. But let's say I had a contractor come in and say, Marc, in order to fix the pipes in your bathroom, we're not going to do any construction in the bedroom. It's not going to happen. And then as he starts the project, he says, well, actually, we're going to have to touch the bedroom. Isn't that what happened here? Now, I think he should have explained that. Rather than pretending he never said the first thing. But is that really, like, if you want to talk about Trump lying, aren't you dumbing down the concept of lying by saying this is some egregious lie and that's what's at issue here?
Well, Marc, that would have been solved. He wouldn't have had to lie if he just submitted it through the proper planning commission and went through the process, and they had the contractor come out and all that, and he would have had to.
I agree
right?
with that.
It's curious that the left's biggest, most consistent critiques of Donald Trump are over process, and I think people don't really care that much about process.
The change in narrative.
Yeah, I actually think that the construction.
Now, I absolutely recognize there are times when process and how you do things is more important than what you actually do. Right? Sometimes the means are more important than the ends.
The White House is like a very powerful psychological framing of what's happening, where you have all of these liberals that really are hopeful that once Trump is gone, he's gone. We'll be able to forget about everything that's happened in this country. There's not going to be any real damage done, and they'll vote him out and they'll put their own people back. But seeing the White House with part of it being kind of demolished and then rebuilt, and something that Trump thinks is amazing, they all say they don't like his taste.
Powerful images. Let's fast forward somewhere in the future, a few months from now. There's going to be an Architectural Digest puff piece about this new ballroom. There's going to be Fox News coverage of this new ballroom. And then you're going to have the images of the greatest ballroom that's ever been out. Are we going to then pivot from these pictures of the destruction to this great ballroom and give them credit for it? Or are we going to just let that memory hold at that point.
Some people will. Jim.
So what's incredible about this second Trump term is how he's been able to intimidate many of America's strongest institutions, which are almost all in the hands of the left and the center left. So up until about 2006, surveys showed that Republicans and Democrats had pretty similar levels of confidence in science and scientists. But then Science Incorporated, right, the institutional complex of universities, public health agencies, academic journals, major foundations, moved much more into overt cultural and political left-wing advocacy. You had much more intense climate change framing, gender identity research. And so there was this accelerated perception that science was being increasingly used as a political weapon rather than as a neutral method. So Republicans began to instinctively distrust science, not so much as a method, but that institutions that claimed to speak for science were politically biased, and Democrats would use trust the science as a moral and partisan marker. And now, at the same time, we had the institutional legal world of big law, the American Bar Association, elite law schools, also shifting steadily more and more to the left. And so now we have this backlash against the left dominating our institutions. And it's, depending on where you stand, it's funny, it's heartbreaking, it's horrifying, it's a reason for pride. It all depends on the nature of your hero system. So the American Medical Association jumped onto gender-affirming medicine. They saw it as a big profit center. And the elites in the medical world and in academic world became more and more strident in support of gender-affirming care, allowing underage teens to get access to gender-switching surgeries and puberty blockers, and it just drove the traditional non-left part of America crazy, and there was a shift. So you had Dr. Shane Siebold Taylor at Vanderbilt University Medical Center giving a 2018 lecture describing these gender transition procedures as big moneymakers and huge moneymakers. And all sorts of other doctors talked about what a big moneymaker it was to do gender-affirming care. And then you have the Associated Press reporting on this, saying social media posts spark calls to investigate this university, right? It's the irresponsible social media posts that are at issue. So the legacy news outlets like the AP and the NPR and NBC, they didn't focus on the substance of what Vanderbilt's own doctors said about how gender-affirming care is so incredibly profitable, right? They frame this controversy as reactionary outrage, it's social media backlash, it's conservative disinformation. Right, they want to shift the moral center away from the institution's conduct towards the supposed hysteria of the critics, right? Because the mainstream media has come to side and protect elite institutions and tries to treat them as victims of mob politics rather than actors with their own agency and incentives, right? Journalists, elite journalists have shown their loyalty to our professional elite peer class. They're all in it together. Now, Donald Trump comes along, starts pushing back against these institutions. Now, many of our biggest institutions and biggest law firms, right, far less likely to challenge Donald Trump. And big law and many other American institutions are apparently regretting throwing in so much with the Democratic Party and the left, because everything you do causes a reaction. And the backlash has been more intense than they were expecting. And if you get to live in a bubble, right, if you get to surround yourself with people who think like you do, it's very easy to get high on your own supply. So the left became so sure of their own righteousness that they're on the right side of history, that the moral arc of history bent in their direction, right? They were able to build a whole moral economy around their own left-wing hero system. They saw themselves as history star protagonists, and they lost the ability to self-correct. They captured all these institutions, and it just felt like a triumph of justice, triumph of morality, not a narrowing of perspective, and inevitably hubris creeps in. Moral certainty replaces humility. Slogans replace evidence. Conformity replaces debate. They have the power. They forget how to critique and question it. And now you're seeing the natural correction. Reality is grinding against the dominant ideology. Institutions that have overreached have lost credibility. They've lost trust. They've lost power. They've lost talent. Right? The pendulum always swings back when people can no longer pretend that the emperor wears clothes. Right? There is no right side of history. Right? There is no arc of moral progress. Right? These are fictional constructs which may or may not be useful, But these are stories, these are narratives, these are not reality. They provide comfort, right? If you want validation for your particular hero system, you can get comfort from these narratives. But history isn't moral, it's adaptive, right? People change and societies change because of pressure, conflict, and necessity, not because the arc of history inevitably bends in one particular direction.
I know, again, I get the ballroom. I actually think it's needed for the White House. But again, we all agree. He lied, and it's like the classic Trump. You just bulldoze literally and figuratively through, and it's like, kiss my you-know-what. I'm doing this.
John.
I look at this and go, I wonder what the conversation is going to be in 2 years when everybody's saying, wow, what a beautiful ballroom, and look at the events that are happening and how practical this is. I've watched video after video. I've watched thing after thing where renovations have occurred. People have knocked down stuff. There's a whole thing that has now been put out that happened under Obama's watch when they redid the front of the facade and the back. I mean, like, this happens. Now,
not like
it might be bigger. It might be a lot bigger. But the bottom line is, I cannot believe everybody's freaking. Like, this is going to be a great addition to the country. It won't even be done till close to to the end of his term. This is
now. What you're very likely to see is that the Democratic candidate for president in 2028 will pledge to knock down Donald Trump's ballroom. So all sorts of things that people think are forever, they don't really last that long.
You have been wrestling all week with why Democrats are so upset by the ballroom. And you hit on something on your podcast that you said something to do with the permanence of it, the mark of Donald Trump on the presidency in the country. And I was thinking about that before you said it, not only the ballroom, but other good ideas that will outlast him, like Space Force, or maybe the army bases renamed to World War II POWs, Hood and Bragg. Soon to be the Arch. So the Rose Garden. I just want to get Ryan's input on, is it the emotional harm of realizing that Trump is not a one-off figure, and that his presidency will outlast him from the good things that people will not tear down.
Yeah. So Justin, Brian, before you answer, first of all, I meant to mention earlier, reports today, I don't know exactly how confirmed it was, that they plan to name the ballroom after President Trump. That'll
decade, Democrats have always thought this was a fever dream, that they were just one scandal away from the entire American public saying, I'm done with this man, rather than saying there's something that he's saying that is true to them. And I think that is, to a certain degree, still the same, that they believe that they are just one protest away from getting rid of him forever, and everyone having this aha moment. And it's especially generational. Older Americans are it's like generational psychosis, because they are the generation still watching cable news a lot, and traditional cable news a lot. And I think that they really do believe, like, I don't think they're lying when they say they think he's a dictator and that he's ending democracy. I just don't think that they're right in what they're saying. And they do believe like they can just have the wall. They've been hearing the walls are closing in for a decade, and now he's remaking the White House. Do you know how much?
Not a new thing. In fact, when I was doing reporting for a book years ago, both Donald Trump and David Axelrod, who worked for Barack Obama, told me a version of the same story, that when Barack Obama was president, Donald Trump went to David Axelrod and said, I'd like to build a ballroom at the White House, and I'll pay for it because America should have a ballroom. If you've ever been to the White House, you know it's not as big and grand as it might seem. The West Wing quarters are cramped. Across the street, the old executive office building is bigger, but it still tends to be smaller overall as a footprint and office space than people think it is. And the challenge that the president has seen, shared by many others, including some of his predecessors, is that there's no good way to entertain at the White House, to have a big state dinner or other big events in a grand style befitting the greatest country on earth. What normally happens for a state dinner is they put a tent up on the White House grounds, and that means people are walking on mud if it's rained, and it's a tent. I mean, you can rent the nicest tent in the world, it's still a tent. So the president's idea, and he's talked about it for a long time, was to build a grand ballroom that would hold hundreds of people, maybe up to 1,000 now, on the White House grounds. And this has caused a huge kerfuffle. Donald Trump causes controversies, kerfuffles, contretemps all the time that the Democrats and their allies in the media, they don't like.
And as long as the Democrats are stuck in just hating Donald Trump, right, they are not spending their energy and their resources towards developing plans to improve the lives of ordinary Americans.
What's confusing to me about this one is the emotion around it. There are lots of legitimate questions, and I'll talk about some of them, about whether this should be happening and how it's happening. And even some conservatives have said, and I agree with this, the president and his team haven't done a good enough job explaining exactly what's going on. But there's some critics who say he should be getting way more approvals than the White House says are required. All of these I get, and all of them are questions that should be asked. What's been confusing to this week, and I've been talking about it in my newsletter, I've been complained about. Here's what I wrote on Twitter. This is one of the most bewildering moments in the decade-long reaction of the resistance to Donald Trump. They seem to look at the construction photos as if they show the wreckage of Trump purposely bombing an orphanage. There's so much reaction I could show you to illustrate how upset people are. And first, let's look at the construction, S3. You've probably seen this online or on TV, but there's various photos. The Washington Post published the first photo showing the building partially taken down. Again, it's not destruction. This is what happens when you do construction of a building. But you can see in the video, it's just, it looks like a construction site. They're taking down the building. And it was announced in the middle of the week that, they're taking down the whole thing. And they're going to replace it with this much larger building. Some are objecting to how big it is as compared to the rest of the White House. But the reaction, and I need to be careful because for a lot of the week, I've been critical of the people who are emotional about this. I really shouldn't be. I want to understand them. And I want people on the right in the White House, I want them to understand why people are so upset. So although I've been mocking, I concede, probably shouldn't have been, less than mocking, I want to explain. I want to try to understand. And so I've asked people all week, why are people so upset? Let me give you examples of some of the upset. Here's Jim Acosta. You know, Jim Acosta, former CNN resistance leader, now part of independent media. Here's Jim Acosta talking about how upset he is and why. This is S5, please.
This is what Donald Trump is doing to the White House right now. He's tearing the shit out of the White House. That belongs to you, the American people. Joe Biden didn't do this. Barack Obama didn't do this. Ronald Reagan didn't do this. George W. Bush didn't do this. Bill Clinton didn't do this. Donald Trump, in his second term, when he's totally unaccountable, ripping the shit out of the White House. We have an out of control president who is acting like a crook. Remember when Richard Nixon said, "I am not a crook"? Donald Trump is telling us he is a crook, but you just can't do anything about it.
All right.
That's
you
what's
get the
happening
point.
right now.
He's
Donald
very
Trump
upset that he's ripping the shit out of the White House, according to Jim Acosta. Here's Karen Finney, longtime Democratic strategist, CNN commentator. She's also very upset about it. And here's how she expressed her upset. S1, please.
I think it's, even if you believe that this was a good idea, I would say the timing is horrible. And look, personally, it was a little shocking to see those images, having worked in the White House. I mean, there's so much beauty and history in the East Wing. So it's sad to see that, that huge hole there.
Again.
So a good way to cut through the nonsense is to ask, is a particular attitude adaptive or not? If it's not adaptive, then it's most likely some kind of status play. And so evolutionary psychology would say when you've got a new gorilla who's in charge, right, you have to bend to that power, and just endlessly being obsessed with fighting it when you don't have the resources to overthrow that dominant gorilla is not adaptive, right? You have to be able to read and adjust to new dominance hierarchies, right? Resisting the ruling dominant hierarchy on moral principle is not adaptive, right? You don't get to survive, amass resources, and pass down your genes more effectively with that attitude, right? We are built to sense power, and we are built to sense when power is shifting, and we will naturally defer to power. And when we have more power, we will naturally expect others to defer to us, right? We are adept at signaling, reading signals, making alliances, changing our tone to survive, right? And people who get stuck in some outdated hierarchy, right, get exiled from the tribe, So when someone has more power, you need to signal respect, not submission, right? You make eye contact, but you don't challenge. You acknowledge the new alpha's legitimacy, right? That means recognizing Trump's power and influence over institutions, public, without feeling the need to either worship or attack him just reflexively. You want to avoid costly virtue displays, right? When moral hierarchies, dominant hierarchies, power hierarchies flip, right? Loud moral posturing tied to the old order is dangerous, right? This is costly, maladaptive signaling, right? If your old tribe's virtue currency has become devalued, then stop spending it. You're more effective, you are safer, you're more adapted to reality if you join with a tribe. You become part of a coalition as opposed to going off as a lone wolf, right? Primates survive transitions through alliances. You find pragmatic allies who are willing to work with the new power structure but still share your goals, right? You develop protective affiliation. You reframe competence as loyalty, right? The more competent you are and the more loyal you are to those with power, right, the better adapted you will be to reality. You can call this reciprocal altruism. You manage your emotions by recognizing reality. You recognize the new shifts in power. All right, so Donald Trump has become the alpha gorilla. The smartest adaptation is not open rebellion, right, but calibration, right? There is a new hierarchy. This is a fact. You stay calm. You adapt and build positions within the new hierarchy. You don't just allow yourself to react emotionally. You will feel emotions. Doesn't mean that they need to guide your behavior. So why doesn't this type of realism inform the elite media coverage and elite discussion? Because our elite journalists and our elites, right, have evolved into much more of a moral performance rather than just detecting and decoding reality. Right? They have stopped optimizing for truth. Instead, our dominant media elite and commentators are built much more for status and coalition maintenance. Our reporters and pundits are operating inside tight social hierarchies in the media, academia, NGOs, and tech. They share in the same prestige economy, the same left-wing hero system. So acknowledging this dominance shift of Trump regaining power, that feels like submitting to the enemy and to the outgroup. So they double down on moral signaling to try to preserve their standing among their peers, right? The human brain will often resist updating. When to do so threatens your identity and your livelihood. It tends to be safer, though less effective, to pathologize the outgroup and to pathologize Trump's power rather than to understand it. So you see a lot of moral panic more than adaptation strategy. You've got journalists and elites fighting to maintain their place within a collapsing moral order, not understanding the new power hierarchy.
The White House has gone through changes. This is not the first president who's tried to make some changes, and what he's going to build hopefully will be very nice, but upsetting to Karen Finney. Here's some other people upset. Gavin Newsom, A3, on Twitter. Gavin Newsom doesn't like the looks of what's happening either. Here's his tweet. Donald Trump doesn't want you to see this picture. He's literally destroying the White House. Reports that the White House has limited the ability of people from the Treasury Department, which has the best view of the East Wing site, from taking photos and video. Another person upset, Hillary Clinton. She tweeted as well. They got some pushback from Republicans who said she wasn't necessarily the best steward of the White House. She tweets about Donald Trump. It's not his house, it's your house, and he's destroying it. Again, yes, they're planning to take down a building, but they're not destroying the entire White House. New York Times, Washington Post, similarly upset. Here's a headline from the New York Times, A6. They don't like it. It's clear from the coverage, and there's been a lot of coverage of it. The White House wrecking ball. Donald Trump's demolition of the East Wing has struck a nerve in Washington and beyond. I'm not sure how they've measured that.
So prior to Joe Biden's disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump in the end of June 2024, I could not find one academic publication questioning Joe Biden's fitness for office, even though we had years of evidence that he was obviously cognitively, at times, not fit for office. You had hundreds of academics, by contrast, who openly came out and said Donald Trump was clearly not fit for office. So why was there not one academic article about Joe Biden's obvious unfitness for office? And so this is what ChatGPT tried to tell me. Oh, it's risk aversion, right? Academics want to avoid publishing sharply critical pieces about sitting presidents unless they have strong data. There was a lack of rigorous data, right? To claim unfitness for office, you need medical and cognitive testing evidence. You need longitudinal data. This data is private. Institutional alignment and bias. It's outside the scope of their academic interest. Political and cultural taboos. Yeah, but you had hundreds of academics publishing from 2016 on that Donald Trump was obviously unfit for office. So this analysis simply does not hold up, right? Academia leans left. It leans into institutions dominated by the Democratic Party. And so criticizing Donald Trump within this world of left-wing academia enhances your prestige, your access to grants, and your sense of belonging to your in-group. Criticizing Joe Biden before it was safe, right, risked your career funding and isolated you from your peers. So you hear a great deal of praise of evolution in the news media and among elites, but this evolutionary analysis of reality is highly selective, right? They invoke evolutionary logic when it flatters their worldview, and they suppress it when it points to uncomfortable truths about reality, group differences, sex differences, dominance, hierarchy, right? Evolutionary reasoning becomes taboo the moment it challenges egalitarian and progressive moral commitments. Right? You'll hear it applied to climate behavior or group empathy, but not to status competition, fertility decline, sexual differences, group differences, right? Elites must believe their power projects transcend biology and evolution. So admitting that our instincts for hierarchy, for tribalism, for particular mating strategies still drive reality would undermine their illusion of their buffered, rational, autonomous, strategic control. So they will treat evolution as a metaphor for progress when it suits them, and they will treat it as a pseudoscience when it doesn't. And I remember when I was in school, it felt like there was a new evolutionary fad that was shifting my education each year, but I wasn't smart enough and learned enough to be able to decode exactly what's going on. And I expect that most Americans can't exactly decode the self-interest games that elites play, but they must sense something, right? People may not be able to name and explain the ideology driving confusing changes in the world around them, but they can feel the manipulation, right? They can sense when elites start using new languages, new rules, new best practices that completely differ from the lived experience of ordinary Americans. So regular Americans may not be able to decode the elite left-wing jargon, but they notice the pattern that someone is experimenting on them and calling it progress. And that's what I felt when I was going through school, primary, high school. I continually felt like someone was experimenting on me. So we did not evolve to be gullible. Why have we had a collapse in our institutions such as schools, media, medicine, government, right? Because it is a normal, healthy reaction of the immune system of a population responding to chronic conceit. Now, I find that when I confess my lies, when I confess my frailty, when I confess my failed attempts to manipulate, when I am open about my incentives, people are very likely to be forgiving, right? Honesty will disarm many status games. When you admit that you were wrong, you were self-interested, you were playing games, right? Then people will instinctively relax around that level of transparency because it lets them recalibrate, right? We have evolved to cooperate with people who are predictable and accountable. When someone is open and honest and asks for forgiveness, right, it restores that predictability. Confession strengthens your credibility more than posturing and manipulative performance does, right? And you give other people a great gift to drop their own masks, right? We all tend to walk around performing how good we are. When you model honesty, blunt self-awareness, it lowers the emotional temperature of your interactions. So radical honesty done appropriately with humility, not as exhibitionism, it feels redemptive, right? It makes community possible again.
There are upset people, but I'm not sure how they know it struck a nerve. Here's the Washington Post headline, A7, can anyone stop Trump's teardown of the East Wing? Okay. A few more people upset. David Axelrod. Okay, I mentioned earlier, David Axelrod talked to Donald Trump once, turned down on Barack Obama's behalf the offer Donald Trump had during the Obama years to build it. Here's what David said. The scope of the demolition and Mr. Trump's repeated promises that the White House itself would not be affected by the work were in many ways symbolic of how he has conducted his presidency. On a variety of issues, Mr. Trump has blown past norms and traditions.
Yeah, that's what is the main concern of ordinary Americans is Trump blowing past norms, right? Is he following the proper process? So what would radical honesty sound like if our major institutions began speaking to us plainly and clearly, right? If the news told us we stopped being neutral a long time ago, we chase clicks, we chase social validation, not truth. We selectively frame stories to serve our own tribe. All right, we need to rebuild our curiosity and humility before we ask you to trust us again. All right, what if university said we turned education into left-wing grooming and career signaling? We censored ideas that made us uncomfortable. We confused political activism for scholarship. We need to rededicate ourselves to pursuing truth. What if public health says we lied to try to manage you? We withheld facts. We exaggerated threats. We silenced dissent because we didn't trust you to act responsibly. We owe you transparency and accountability. Right? What if big tech said we tried to manipulate your emotions and your politics for profit? What if corporate America said we've been using left-wing social causes as marketing? We preach inclusion while exploiting labor. We say values, but we mean risk management. Right? Honesty is good for the individual soul, and honesty would be good for America's soul. Right? It would strip away the false consensus that props up our institutional decay. Right? We would have, if honesty took hold, we'd have a collapse of fake legitimacy. We'd have a rebuilding of trust. We'd have a cultural reset. Right? Short term, we'd have chaos. The long-term effect would be renewal. We'd have a moral revival, and that could begin with confession, not with pride and humiliation. Right? We need to confess our incentives. We need to separate our moral claims from our factual claims. We need to show data, not just our moral conclusions.
Norms and traditions, often moving so quickly that it can be too late for courts, Congress, or the public to catch up. Okay, so he's upset. He's upset. He says, this image of the East Wing of the White House is a metaphor for a broader, reckless destruction. The ballroom that will go up there will be a gaudy monument to vanity, corruption, and excess. For anyone who's worked at the White House or cares about its rich history, it's a gut punch. That's the sensibility I've heard from so many Democrats this week on two-way, seen them on the media. It's a gut punch. It's a gut punch. Now, there's so many things Donald Trump has done that the Democrats have felt strongly about and they don't like. And a lot of them, I see their point clearly. But this is a...
So we had the coach of the Portland Trailblazers charged with criminal betting behavior. We had NBA player and ex-NBA players getting charged with participation in gambling schemes. And the Wall Street Journal reported last week, basketball has proven especially susceptible to foul play. Why? So I asked ChatGPT, it says the socioeconomic pipeline that basketball draws disproportionately from poorer urban backgrounds where exposure to crime, gambling, and hustling is more common. Beverly Hills tore down many of their public basketball courts because they didn't want to attract basketball Americans. Hockey and golf, right, skew towards middle and upper middle class upbringings, where there are more stable institutions, less contact with criminal networks. Right, basketball is tightly connected to street culture, hip hop, and informal money games. So, I guess more rappers tend to get shot than classical musicians, right? They live and they work and they operate in totally different ecosystems. Rap comes from poor, high-crime neighborhoods. Rap prizes authenticity and toughness and feuding. Rappers perform in proximity to danger. Remember when NBA players got a dress code, right? That was 2005. The then Commissioner David Stern imposed the NBA dress code after the 2004 Malice at the Palace brawl and a whole bunch of off-the-court incidents that made the league look out of control. Right, the NBA was in a mess in the 1970s when the league again looked out of control. So David Stern required a business casual dress code that banned oversized t-shirts, jewelry, large jewelry, sunglasses indoors, and headgear. Right, the league wanted to signal professionalism, discipline, and distance from the gang and street culture. Players saw it as racially coded, a way to police blacks and to align the league with corporate respectability. So what would it look like if the NBA developed these tighter, wider behavioral norms and had less tolerance for scandal? Right, you'd see a total shift in presentation, incentives, and discipline. Right, players would begin to look like corporate ambassadors rather than street icons. They become more 1950s America. You would have speech and self-presentation changing to be more bland, respectful, sponsor safe. You'd have less controversial social commentary, less taunting. So many horrible shootings and murders take place in large part due to low IQ social media beefs. Maybe the game would feel more sterile. Maybe there'd be less personality, less flair. Right, ratings might fall, but respectability would rise. Right, maybe the NBA would start to resemble hockey: elite, polite, well-regulated, emotionally flat. It would be safer. Maybe you'd have more team play and less hot dogging. Maybe you'd have a more conservative, tightly policed NBA culture producing more disciplined, system-driven basketball. Maybe you'd have less isolation play, more structured sets, fewer one-on-one showcases, more ball movement, right? Something closer to international and college basketball. Coaches would have more control. Star players would not dominate decision-making and locker room culture. Coaches would dictate tempo and shot selection. You'd have less showboating, trash-talking, taunting, right? More Tim Duncan rather than Allen Iverson. You'd have more conformity. You'd have a more polite public tone. Probably have more collective efficiency and less swagger, improvisation, and expressive ego, right? It'd look more like 1950s America. To have more restraint over expression, conformity over individuality, stronger institutions overpowering personalities. Players would become company men. Coaches and owners would command deference. The media would reward politeness and punish defiance. The crowd would become older, whiter, more middle class, less rowdy, become more like Eisenhower's America, more controlled, more predictable, more respectable. You'd get more craftsmanship, more teamwork. The league would be cleaner, safer. Good manners would replace the showboating and the taunting. I mean, what would America look like if we were cleaner, safer, and we had better manners rather than so much improvisation?
The gut punch. That's the part I've been trying to understand. So again, I've been doing a lot of reporting, asking Democrats, asking members of the two-way community, explain this. Why are people seeing this as a gut punch? So I got a lot of good replies, and I'm going to share them with you. But first, let's try to understand this again. The president and his experts, he's got an architect, a construction crew. At first, they thought they'd be kind of working around the East Wing, and then they made the judgment, no, the East Wing's going to have to come down, and those offices will be moved, and they're going to build this big structure. So I said to people, again, why is it? So here's some of the good explanations I got. Some from MAGA people, some not. Here's one from someone who's not MAGA, who does not like Donald Trump. Here's his explanation of why are people so emotional about these images of a construction site. Democrat emotion is over Trump building a new temple on the old Temple Mount. That he is doing this is sinking in on Democrats as they see pictures in disbelief. The emotional reaction sits on the truth behind what he is doing, even if it is silly to say it will be a tipping point for the election. The emotion is on point. Trump is building his temple on the old temple. Make no mistake about it. His side, my side agree on that. Neera Tanden, longtime, very senior Democrat, Center for American Progress, worked in the Clinton administration, Biden, Obama. Here's what she tweeted. This is A1. Neera thinks these images are so searing and so significant. She believes they'll have a massive political impact. She says, I genuinely think the images of them destroying the East Wing of the White House could be a game changer in the elections. Count me as a little skeptical on that. But other people who offered explanations said this to me. They said, I think that deep down in 3 years, the Democrats want to erase every last bit of Trump from their memories. They may even want to pretend that he never happened at all. So to see the new ballroom or whatever else he does in the East Wing as a permanent reminder, they're screaming so loudly about it because...
So Adam Smith, in his 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations, he said that there are many vices that middle and upper class people can participate in without any great damage. But if someone from the underclass was to participate even once, it would destroy them. So there are all sorts of mistakes that you only need to make once if you don't have the resources and the discipline of the upper classes. And so a more morally regulated America would take greater care and would provide greater protection to the most vulnerable among us from making that one singular mistake that will destroy lives, right? It is the underclass that bears the steepest price for sexual promiscuity, for excessive drugging and drinking, for reckless behavior, right? Because the underclass does not have the buffers, the money, the education, the lawyers, the social capital that protect the middle and upper classes from their own mistakes. So one bad decision with drugs, sex, violence, money, right, can end everything. So a more morally regulated America with stronger family structure, stronger religion, stronger social pressure, right, more guardrails for people without other forms of insulation would dramatically improve the quality of life for the most vulnerable among us. Right? The elite tend to push moral deregulation in the name of compassion and liberation, but they live by quiet restraint, marriage, discipline, delayed gratification, while preaching freedom to the people who can least afford the dangers of freedom. So you have cultural chaos at the bottom and curated bohemia at the top. Right? More moral regulation would create an NBA that more closely resembles the New England Patriots under Bill Belichick. Right? They were the moral regulation model of pro sports in some way. Right? Players were drilled to suppress their ego, their emotion, their individuality. They dressed alike. They spoke alike. Right? They essentially answered every media question with, "We're on to Cincinnati." Right? No jewelry, no dance celebrations, no public feuding. The organization prized secrecy, discipline, obedience, and anyone who broke that rhythm, such as Antonio Brown, was cut fast. And it worked. Right? They won relentlessly. They eliminated distraction. They turned their conformity into a competitive edge. Right? I want a cleaner, safer, more morally regulated America that does more, is more paternalistic, more protective of those who are most vulnerable, those for whom one bad decision will wreck their life. I want more noblesse oblige. Right? I want a moral revival. I want stronger family, stronger social bonds. I want people to be able to purchase, say, health insurance through their church. Right? I want stronger unions, fraternal lodges, community centers, youth leagues. Right? I want a cultural tone that celebrates dignity, craft, quiet heroism rather than trash-talking exhibitionism and vice. I want economic guardrails. I don't want to valorize the free market over every other consideration. I want to valorize instead extending and maximizing the dignity of my fellow Americans. Right? I want moral hierarchy. Right? A less individualist America. Right? I think you should have to prove your bona fides before you get to enjoy the more dangerous benefits of individualism, such as drinking. Right? People should have to vouch for you before you can have a driver's license, before you can own a gun. Right? You should have to prove yourself worthy of membership first before you get to engage in more dangerous self-expression. Right? Many freedoms should not be considered a birthright, such as a driver's license. They should be a privilege that flows from good behavior, from service, from responsibility. Right? Before you find yourself, you must first find your role in your family, community, and institution. All right, we need more communal vetting. We need rites of passage. You have to prove yourself. We need to honor good behavior. We need denser, tighter communities. All right, if you can't get 5 law-abiding adults to vouch for you by age 18, right, you shouldn't be allowed a driver's license. If you can't find 5 law-abiding adults to vouch for you by age 18, you should have to enter some form of national service. Right? Maybe you should not be allowed out after 10 p.m. without a good cause. Maybe you should not be allowed to enter certain high-value areas, right? Vouch nationalism, right? Many of your privileges must be contingent on demonstration of good behavior and that people are willing to vouch for you, right? And if you behave badly, those who vouch for you should have to pay the price. Right? You don't get to vote. You don't get to fly. You can't buy alcohol. Right? You can't have access to guns. You can't have access to all sorts of dangerous freedoms unless, say, 5 law-abiding adults vouch for you. Right? We need a moral credit system, a civic apprenticeship. Right? You should have a mini jury of your peers who put their own capital, moral capital on the line so that they vet you the way that a bank vets a borrower. Right? You should have a mentor. Right? Everyone needs a Rebbe, so to speak. Right? You don't get to reproduce unless you have 5 law-abiding adults who vouch for you. Right? You will see all sorts of benefits if you join a group and sacrifice and abide by a covenant agreement, certain behavioral standards, no drugs, no gambling. Right? You have moral risk pooling, where the community that joins says, yes, you live by our code, you get to join our risk pool. Right? We should tie social welfare spending and privileges to a requirement for vouchers from law-abiding adults who will take responsibility for you.
It's sort of like having to permanently hang in your living room a portrait of your ex-wife or ex-husband who drained you financially and emotionally in a divorce. Is it literally a big deal? No, it's just a painting, but that reminder of the destroyed feelings would be there forever. Second to last, here's someone who is MAGA. A very similar explanation. Says, those with Trump derangement syndrome think or hope that once Trump is gone, he will be relegated to the dustbin of history, and that this moment in time is just a blip. But the renovation, destruction, the renovation of the East Wing and building of the ballroom represents a manifestation of its historical permanence. Most other things, policy statements, etc., can be ignored or purposely forgotten, but this is literally a physical reminder of his influence on the country. That kills them inside. That sounds like it could be right to me. Lastly, and this is on the optimistic side, this is from someone who describes himself as a woke California Democrat, never Trumper. Here's what he says. Optimistic rather than despondent. I've never met any commercial real estate developer I trust in politics, and I hate most things about Trump. But there is one thing I trust Trump to do: build over the top nice things. His vanity and brand protection instincts will create a beautiful ballroom. Democrats should say this is the one thing Trump will get right. That seems
right. A horrifying story here in the New York Times. Can anyone rescue the trafficked girls of LA's Figueroa Street? God forbid. Right. Apparently, starting girls age 11 on up are selling themselves for sex. And then you have this whole cadre of people trying to rescue them. But these underage girls who are sex workers, they don't want to be rescued. So do they deserve their own moral autonomy to participate in sex work at age 13?
The Vice unit has identified
the United States, known as the Blade. It's about a 50-block stretch.
There are churches and schools, but there are also girls as young as 11
forced to solicit customers for sex. I've been following this story for more than 2.5 years. I interviewed the mayor of Los Angeles. I interviewed the city attorney. No one has been able to uproot this issue. The 77th Street Division of the Los Angeles Police Department is responsible for the northern half of the Blade.
The Vice unit has identified hundreds of suspected traffickers. But even when officers are confident, they need to collect enormous amounts of evidence in order to arrest them and then prosecute them in court. They often rely on rescuing these juvenile girls, in part to help them escape, but also to gather intelligence about their traffickers.
Today we'll be doing a juvenile CSEC minor rescue operation starting at 1900.
The plan for tonight is to go out with undercover operators who are going to try to pose as customers.
Anyone that is youthful in appearance and is confirmed to be a street walking prostitute will be detained pending a human trafficking investigation and brought back here.
On this particular street in Los Angeles, prostitution has always been a problem. But it's in recent years that child sex trafficking has become a bigger issue. It began during the pandemic. Lots of children were out of school. They were spending more time online on social media, which is where a lot of sex traffickers recruit children.
And after 2020, you see such an influx of women. It's a lot of money out here. These gang members notice that. If you have one girl, you can easily make $1,200 a day, easily. And the females are very reluctant to turn them in.
But as this crisis has grown, the officers say that the resources to fight it have not kept up. LAPD's Central Human Trafficking Unit has been disbanded, which means vice units like the one at 77th Street Division are having to carve out the time for this on their own. 5 years ago, uniformed officers could have pulled up to a corner and apprehended a whole group of girls who are dressed in lingerie, hoping to recover minors among them. But a 2022 bill,
Senate Bill 357,
repealed that law.
Which repeals provisions of the law that criminalize loitering with the intent to engage in sex work. You can't arrest somebody for how they look. You need to actually catch them in that act.
Now officers have to pursue girls one at a time. That requires methodical undercover operations.
One of the undercover officers identified a juvenile on social media who's planning to meet up with him for sex. They're hoping to arrange a pickup for that girl.
They have a possible juvenile detained. She's agreed to meet them at this corner, at this intersection. She told him how she's going to be dressed, and sure enough, they see her walking up, matching the description, and it turns out she's 14.
The girl is temporarily handcuffed, but she's not being arrested. This is what the squad calls a juvie rescue operation.
They're going to call Children's Services, and she'll be taken to get medically screened and then placement for her. And they're going to make contact with the parents. She's very young. Hopefully we caught her soon enough.
When juvenile girls are brought into the station, they're not booked for the crime of prostitution.
The vast majority of these girls are coming from the foster care system. Traffickers are able to lure them in with love and affection. Then over time, they start to rely on violence and manipulation to keep them from leaving. The DA's office has begun prosecuting more traffickers, but the reality is that 3 out of 4 girls who are rescued from the Blade tend to go back to their trafficker.
Right, trafficking is their choice. I'm not supporting their choice, but that seems to be the uncomfortable.
Once in a while, as a reporter, you get a tip from someone you don't expect. Back in the spring of 2023, a high-level official told me in an off-the-record conversation that there was something that kept them up at night. It was a problem in Los Angeles that almost no one was talking about. The pipeline between...
And it's a bill passed by the California legislature that makes it harder to stop this child sex trafficking. So the dominant elite are very opposed to underage girls, and I am too, selling their services for sex, but completely support their autonomy to get an abortion or to change their sex, to have gender-affirming butchery, surgery, puberty blockers that will give them lifetime negative health consequences.
In the foster care system and child sex trafficking.
All right, this is how the story begins about this 14-year-old girl, Anna. Anna paced on the sidewalk at 68th and Figueroa, her front teeth missing and an ostomy bag taped down under her hot pink lingerie. Like, what the hell? An ostomy bag? You would really go have sex with a prostitute who has an ostomy bag?
The officials sounded almost angry when they were talking about it. They told me to look into it. They told me it was a systemic issue and that it was happening right here under our noses. Hi, I'm Emily Baumgartner-Nunn, and I'm a national health correspondent for the New York Times. Part of my job is to report on children, so I've always kept an eye on the country's foster care system, the children that much of society seems to overlook. I knew that foster kids were at a higher risk for...
So when I first started reading this story, I thought this got to be fabricated, but it doesn't seem to be any evidence for this story being fabricated. So elites completely opposed to autonomy for teens to do sex work, right? To engage in many labor contracts, right? Their earnings are controlled until they're 18, right? Schools get to control them, right? The justice system treats them as not fully human. They're relocated or emancipated by society, right? But they support all sorts of autonomy for underage teens, right? They get to have abortions without informing their parents. They get to make reproductive decisions. They get to change their sexual identity, all right? When their activism, their speech and political identity aligns with fashionable causes such as on climate, racial justice, sexual identity, right? Then their activism is protected. Your sexual orientation is treated as a personal truth. Parental opposition is dangerous and repression. So autonomy advances elite ideological goals towards sexual liberation and identity, self-definition, and progressive politics, and then it's celebrated as empowerment. But when it comes to labor markets and sex work, right, then no autonomy. So this elite attitude towards the autonomy of underage teens is not really about capacity or neuroscience, right? It's all about what values society chooses to elevate, right? Autonomy is selectively granted to reinforce certain hero system. So the left wants teens who rape and murder to not be tried as adults. All right, so from a traditional perspective, underage autonomy is a contradiction in terms, right? Because the traditional perspective, the tribal perspective, the nationalist perspective, the religious perspective assumes that people are not primarily individuals. They're part of an extended family, and that their moral and emotional maturity will develop through a hierarchy of family, faith, community, not through their own individual experimentation, right? So giving teens broad autonomy to change their sexual identity, right, is seen as exposing them to chaos before they can handle it. All right, from a trad perspective, the parents, not the state, not their peers, should be the primary moral authorities. Right? There's no autonomy for children without regard to family, right? Their body and soul are not private property. So the traditional position sees autonomy as something that you grow into, not something that you are just given automatically by society, right? I don't see people primarily as individuals. I see them primarily as a member of an extended family, right? You need to live up to your responsibilities to receive privileges.
Trafficking. But I assumed I'd have to dig around in online chat rooms and through government records to find the evidence for that. I had no idea that I would witness it firsthand and in broad daylight. If you're standing on USC's beautiful campus and you drive just 8 minutes south, you'll find yourself at the edge of an area called the Blade, a roughly 50-block segment of Figueroa Street. There are a few elementary schools, lots of churches, parents are pushing toddlers in strollers, and children are riding their bikes. And yet, along that same street, preteens and teenage girls are teetering on giant stilettos, often in the middle of the road. From far away, they look like young women. They're in lingerie, their eyes are ringed in mascara and glitter, and some of them are wearing wigs. But if you get up close enough to see their facial features, it becomes obvious that they're incredibly young. Some are only...
And the more the left has power in America's cities, right, the more sex work is decriminalized and the more difficult it is made to crack down on this child prostitution.
10 or 11 years old. They lean into the car windows, and when they secure a customer, they open the passenger seat door and disappear inside. I started by looking into what officials in LA were doing to try to combat the issue, and then I worked backwards. I knew I could find out how locals felt about the trafficking by listening in on the city's nuisance abatement hearings, where the zoning administrator was hearing public comment on motels that were tied to sex trafficking.
Hey, I've been a police officer for approximately 5 years, was born and raised here in the city of Los Angeles, and I still currently reside here.
That's where I first heard Officer Elizabeth Armendariz testify, describing how entire motels were running much like brothels for pimps and the girls they controlled.
I have seen street-walking prostitutes at every hour of the day coming out of the Foxy's Motor Inn, either bringing in clientele or walking them out at the completion of their services. I've responded.
Everything leaks, right? That's why I believe in a porous identity. What you do in private, it will inevitably leak out. Everything that you do, including the most private things, inevitably affects other people. And so if there's this kind of moral degradation going on next door, it's going to have a negative effect on you. Right? At a certain level of moral anarchy and chaos, all sorts of bad things start happening.
To multiple, and I do mean multiple, prostitution bait robberies at this exact location.
The way she talked about it was calm, procedural, like she'd said these things 100 times before. But what she described was anything but routine.
And this goes without saying, but prostitution isn't a victimless crime. It's one of the biggest ways children are trafficked off into the sex trade, and it's also one of the...
Liz is a senior vice investigator for LAPD. Sometimes she goes undercover as a sex worker and even poses as a minor online to bring traffickers to justice. I told her that I wanted to go undercover with her. And after more than a year of us talking, she finally said yes.
Well, as long as they wear a mask, right? As long as they follow the right process, as long as they use a condom, right? As long as they do it in a safe way. There is a podcast that I've begun enjoying. It's called Evolutionary Psychology. It features David Pinsof as one of the two professors who operates this podcast. Some basic truths, powerful truths about life.
That are wrong,
yeah. And so early studies on shame that I've done, so it's a little bit like recapitulating the self-esteem theory of self-esteem. In self-esteem, people found a correlation between self-esteem, how I feel about myself, and all sorts of good outcomes, happy people, richer people with more attractive mates, and happy kids, and beautiful large cars in California.
Yeah, so we just got to jack up everyone's self-esteem, and then
exactly.
all of our problems will be solved. Yeah.
Yes.
There was it's a story worth of Tom Wolfe, the great American satirist and commentarist.
So I think this guy Daniel's from Poland.
There's a guy by the name of Joe Vasconcelos or something like that. They saw correlations between high self-esteem and all sorts of good outcomes, and they ran to say, okay, we need a task force and we need to invest millions of dollars in interventions. They ran to the interventions, the college interventions, school interventions, and they spend God knows how much money in order to boost self-esteem. So I go to UCSB when I was a grad student, and I'm riding my bike on the way to some department or somewhere, and I see an art student holding a mirror with a banner on top of the mirror, and the thing says, "You're beautiful" or "I'm beautiful," meaning it's a self-esteem boosting intervention. And if we
So I joined the Boyne Island Tenamasan Soccer Club. I don't have any sporting prowess, but when I went back to Australia at age 18 after graduating high school, and every single person on the club got a trophy at the end of our mediocre season.
Do that, then everyone is happy and winning. And I'm thinking to myself, what crap is this? I'm ugly. You're not gonna fool me. I'm ugly. I'm not beautiful. What is this? What is this garbage? Okay, so all of these things, participation trophies, and these multi-decadal intervention on self-esteem has the origins in this iffy, weak thinking that there's a self, there's a correlation. Let's boost the correlation, and so
yeah, it's kind of amazing how much bad psychology has just infiltrated Western culture. I mean, this idea that we do things to increase our self-esteem or to feel good about ourselves, and we need to make everyone feel good about themselves. Like, that is a really huge part of Western culture, and it's kind of amazing how much that idea is just pervasive in the way we talk and engage with each other.
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of like advertising too. It's just sort of like and I just like to. We had Ed Aiken on, and he had this really good point that it's sort of the medical analog with pain is really clear. And Daniel, you alluded to that earlier, where you would sort of laugh if somebody said, "Well, like we've done these studies, and like if a bone is broken, or their lung is punctured, or they're bleeding, their skull is fractured, they're in pain." And so the way to make people's bodies better is to get rid of pain. Right? Like if you just gave them drugs so they wouldn't feel the pain, like that would be a joke, right? Of course, what you do is you fix the problem and the pain, but you don't just give them the painkiller and then just send them back out in the world with a broken bone or a punctured lung or, a cracked skull. And I think that exactly the self-esteem, if Daniel, what you're saying is that the reason why self-esteem was tracking these things is because these were good things, like people who are healthy, people who have support, who have resources, who are doing okay in life. It makes sense that their psychology has this setting of like things are pretty good, but that's not the causal element just in the same way. And that's not like the point of leverage of changing it. It's in the same way that like you wouldn't just change the pain level without addressing like the broken bone.
Totally. Yep. So I have, how much shame would you feel if this was true of you? The other half of the people imagine this is true of someone else. How negatively would you view them? A rough measure of devaluation. The thing I wanted to say is costs and benefits are perhaps the most fundamental variables in all models of the evolution of anything. R be greater than C in kin selection, in friendship evolution, in parental investment, for behavior guidance. So you're integrating two streams of value. One is the personal payoff of getting the piece of cake or having the sex act with that person or staying lazy in bed instead of studying, etc. And the other one is the social payoff. And in order for adaptive behavior guidance, you need a lawful, smart, fitness promoting integration of these values. And so the idea is that the expanding to many different things, shame, pride, and pride is the cousin of shame. So same thing with many different cultures. The pride is the emotion of advertising your greatness so that other people value you more highly and demanding that increase in valuation. It's not just doing the I'm great, but also making sure that other people increase how much you're saying. The terms for the interaction should be more favorable to me if I really achieve something great.
Right. I mean, that sort of runs counter to a popular cultural idea that we do things to increase our self-esteem or to feel good about ourselves, regardless of what other people think of us. We might even say, I don't care what other people think. I want to write this book for me so that I can feel good about myself, that I did a good thing. I don't care what other people think about me writing the book, or I'm gonna get this PhD because it's for me, it's personally fulfilling, or I'm gonna do this charity work for me. It's I don't care what other people think of it, right? What your data shows is that that's wrong. In some part of the mind, you are judging what other people are going to think of you for doing this thing, and you are going to be more motivated to do the things that other people judge you positively for doing. Right? That there is a very tight relationship between what I feel proud of and what I anticipate feeling proud of, and the status I get from other people for doing that thing. And you would not expect that relationship to exist if pride was just
right. You can't generate your own pride. You get pride from becoming valuable to other people.
About me, and not about how other people see me. Right?
Yeah, that this seems as the expert bullshitologist, these are the trope that I'm doing it for myself and I don't care what other people say. That seems like bullshit, and that seems like bullshit relevant to these social games.
Yeah. Can I just people are saying that? I think it's a smart evolved system that's sort of saying it's almost like it's sort of finding a status game where it's sort of like, I want to do this thing, like write a book, but I'm worried about people laughing at me and making fun of me. And I think the expression of like, I'm going to do it for myself and not care about what people think is the output of planning and motivational systems that are basically saying, I think I'm still going to get status or some benefit to doing this, but I need to recalibrate which audience I calibrate my self-conscious emotions to. So in other words, like, I'm going to do well in school, and I'm not going to worry about what the bullies think about me. And so I'm going to do it for myself is the expression of, I'm going to play this status game, but I'm currently getting like the outputs of worrying about audiences that I don't think are in my long-term interest. So I do think like there's a smart...
Right, you can change the group of people that matter to you. Right, you can never be unconcerned about what other people think, but you can recalibrate whose opinion you care about most. One of the most interesting thinkers on the new right in the United States is Helen Andrews. Here she is talking with Oren Cass.
That is not the paramount concern. They regard a magazine as an institutional player. The first magazine where I had a permanent job was at National Review, and I think very fondly on my time there. I have a lot of respect for the people I worked with. But there was a senior editor there who made very clear in a conversation once that he regarded the magazine's finest hour as its purging of the John Birch Society, purging the Birchers, the moment when William F. Buckley excommunicated the Birchers from the conservative movement. And I thought, well, okay, to be clear, fine moment, but it seems like if you run a magazine, your finest moment should be something having to do with like advancing an idea or something that you published, like a really good article that was well written, not policing the boundaries of your movement. But it seems like that was the role in the part of the magazine's mission that was closest to the heart of some people.
Well, people love flexing. People love exercising power.
The gatekeeper role, which is the opposite of intellectual.
Right, intellectuals tend to valorize all sorts of things above optimizing for truth.
Exploration and dynamism. So it's kind of contrary. It's funny. You think these people are very attached to the free market and the idea that if you don't put out a product people want, people will stop buying it and you will go out of business, and that's the way it's supposed to work. Well, that's not really the way it works in journalism all the time. The quality of the product is not always the number one determinant of whether you succeed or fail.
Yeah, no, it is certainly the case that on the right of center, the share of people most passionate about the wonders of the free market, whose own employment is least correlated to any sense of market pressure or signal, is certainly to the high side. But it also, it's interesting what you're describing almost is sort of at a meta level, or maybe a microcosm, I can't decide which, of the sort of debate over populism that has been going on the right of center, and the question of, what the people out there in the world actually care about and want to focus on is something that the people publishing the magazines should care about. And so I guess it is natural maybe that the same magazines whose core idea is we do not care, and in fact believe these people are wrong and don't know how great they have it, would likewise see their role very, very much as a gatekeeping one. But well, it's, yeah.
You could almost draw a parallel to what's going on the left. Matt Iglesias is not someone that I follow very closely, but he did tweet an interesting observation just in the last week or so, where he said how odd that all of the left-wing magazines that we thought were so influential and great during the Clinton years and the Bush years and even the Obama years, the New Republic and The Nation and all these institutions of left-wing journalism, now are so far to the fringes that not one of them will, seems to stand on the solid ground of Barack Obama was a good president, right? Like Barack Obama being good is insane centrism from the perspective of Slate or the New Republic. And I think it's true when you look at the way a lot of these magazines on the left have gone, is that they've really spun out of orbit and been taken over by really, really fringy left-wing people. And on the one hand, that's bad for your political coalition, because that's allowing your most radical activists to steer your party in a direction that is contrary to where your voters are, your supporters are. And it's also just really boring.
Interesting conversation on a new book, Stop Buying the Left versus Right Myth. Here's Nick Gillespie conducting the interview.
This is a point of minor embarrassment. My older son was a political science major as an undergrad. And like when he started, I've been a political journalist for over 30 years, and I don't know certain theories that I should have known a long time ago. But he was saying, and you guys hammer this home in your book, that once you identify as a member of a team or a group or a tribe, you'll change your views rather, if the tribe says, okay, we're not in favor of that war anymore, and we've always been against it, you'll change your view rather than change your tribe. Can you talk a little?
Yeah, we did not evolve to make our decisions on the basis of moral principle, on the basis of universal principles, on the basis of philosophical truth, right? We evolved to find our place within a tribe.
Little bit about why does that, how does that work on either an individual level or a collective level? It would seem, when you enter a party, and I know a lot of people, the Iraq War was a very good example of this over the past, in the 21st century, where people became activated into politics because they were either very for it or very against it, and then their parties change, but they don't change their parties. What's going on with that?
Yeah. So the human capacity for self-deception is enormous, which is a really sad thing, right? I don't think people are lying when they change their views. I think they really think, no, I'm being a consistent conservative, or I'm being a consistent progressive. Now, the parties have every incentive in the world to propagate this myth. They love you to think that when you vote for their party, you're voting for a philosophy or for a set of policies that grow out of a righteous worldview. If you're on the left, you care about social justice. Therefore, donate to the Democratic Party, vote for the Democratic Party.
So when you live within a particular hero system and almost all your friends subscribe basically to your hero system, things that go on outside of your hero system are absolutely unfathomable. So things like anorexia nervosa and bulimia are largely unknown in the traditional religious communities in which I've lived. And then to have a gorgeous singer like Karen Carpenter die from heart failure caused by years of malnutrition. Just why would someone have an eating disorder? Virtually unknown in a traditional religious community, right? In a traditional, tight-knit, high-intensity, low individual freedom, low autonomy culture such as traditional Seventh-day Adventism, traditional Orthodox Judaism, traditional Roman Catholicism, they don't tend to have eating disorders. You don't tend to have all these people identifying as trans, right? Anorexia is deeply tied to status anxiety and your concerns about your worth in a highly individualist, highly visible society. In a traditional culture, in a tight-knit culture, in a tribe, right? Your value comes from fulfilling your clear social external roles in your family, your religion, your community, right? Self-worth is anchored externally, and it's stable. You don't have to invent your identity every day. So in modern liberal autonomous individualist societies, people are told, oh, you can be anything, and then they feel like their worth is on the line every day in their appearance, their success, their autonomy. People are just chronically comparing themselves. Every reaction that they get becomes frightening. Your body becomes a battlefield for maintaining your control and your sense of dignity, right? When you're highly anxious about your status, when you feel like you have no solid foundation, then you're much more vulnerable to things like eating disorders and transmania, right? When you get outside of meaning, morality, and the right way to live your life is found outside of you in your community, in your tribe, then life can just spiral. And it's just not something that you really get that much of in the traditional community. So watching the World Series, not nearly as big a deal as it was in the 70s and early 80s. All right, so I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, came to America, and I extended my Christianity out to the Dodgers and the Cowboys, right? They seemed like disciplined, Christian, excellent teams. I learned air supply for articulating my feelings and giving me comfort. I started getting this, fuller, deeper, wider emotional world that was moral, heroic, sentimental. And I'm now listening to the commentary of John Smoltz, former star pitcher, and so good, right? He helps open my mind to so many different things going on in the World Series, all sorts of patterns that I didn't notice. I just can't believe how much I'm learning about the importance, whether a pitcher has his fastball working, right? If he can only throw it at 93, that's very different from having a fastball that you can throw for strikes at 97 miles an hour. We had the Toronto Blue Jays starting pitcher. He only had his slider working, yet he only gave up 2 runs. Right? When you only have one pitch that's working for you, how much more vulnerable you are. It's outrageous that these human umpires, they're only getting about 85% of their balls and strikes calls correct. Right? I support full automation so that we can have these strikes completely accurate. And have you noticed over the past year that the Wall Street Journal has become the most interesting, the most important, the most exciting newspaper in the world, just breaking so many fascinating stories on a regular basis? Marc Halperin says he's checking the Wall Street Journal before the New York Times these days. So what transformed the Wall Street Journal? Right? They brought in a new editor from England, Emma Tucker, emphasizes an audience-first mindset, says ChatGPT, right? Constantly asking, are we adding value to our audience? Right? The Wall Street Journal consistently delivering fascinating, definitive reporting, not just engaging in commentary aggregation, turning out predictable stories. The Wall Street Journal, suddenly, over the past year, has become the best newspaper in the world. It was the first newspaper to write in depth about Joe Biden's cognitive decline in something like March or April of 2024.
Because everything we believe stands for social justice. The reality is that the Democratic Party stands for a random basket of a whole bunch of different things that are unrelated. If you tell that to people, you're much less likely to get them fired up and wanting to go out to elect. So yeah, it is pretty interesting. You put people in a laboratory and you can make them change their mind just by giving them different social cues. You can make conservatives support a higher minimum wage if you tell them that Donald Trump supports it. You can make them support a lower minimum wage if you tell them Donald Trump supports it. People will move all over the place, and then they will deceive themselves after the fact with stories. Ooh, well, a higher minimum wage would conserve a lifestyle, and that's conservative. Oh, a lower minimum wage would conserve free markets, and I believe in conserving free markets. You can make up a conservative or a progressive story to justify any policy.
Well, let's talk about the Democrats, and then we'll talk more about the GOP and about Trump, who's a fascinating figure for any number of reasons, not simply because he's pulled a Grover Cleveland, and not simply by filling out his suit pretty full, but how do you map the basic theory of myth of left and right onto what happened to the Democrats in this election? Is there a way to kind of thread that needle?
Well, I would say, one of the interesting things about the parties and the myth of left and right is it does promote this kind of tribalism that we mentioned. Because if you think about for most of American history, and you mentioned this earlier about how...
Right, when America was dominated by Protestants, by WASP, tribal, right? That was a pejorative term. That was a dirty term. But as America has become less WASP dominated, tribal has become much more neutral. And we should recognize the reality is that we are wired to be tribal. We are wired to essentialize outgroups, right? We are wired to primarily care about our own group and to have many negative feelings about any outgroup that threatens everything that we hold precious.
Increasing use of left wing and right wing. But for most of American history, we didn't use these terms, left wing and right wing. No one thought and talked about politics in terms of a left-right framework until the 1930s, and it really took off in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s until it's ubiquitous today. But for most of American history, people kind of kept their political parties in the sense that, look, this is a political party that I identify with because it has more of the stuff I like than the other political party. But I'm not deluding myself into thinking that everything that my party believes is better than everything that the other party believes. Right, but once you adopt left-right thinking,
and if I may, it's also true that kind of the general theory is of in politics, if you wanted to be a national party, you had to represent everybody in the country at least a little bit, because otherwise, why would people who are only interested in manufacturing, what would they? How would they appeal to people in the South? I mean, I think partly because it was so dominant for so long, but the Democratic Party in America before the Civil Rights Movement is fascinating, where you have people like Franklin Roosevelt, and then you have who's an urbanist and a manufacturing, interested in manufacturing stuff, very urban, teaming up with people who were super racist and super rural, like agrarians, but they were all Democrats, right? Because the party had to cover everybody.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Democratic Party's problem in this election was precisely the myth of left and right. They bought into it. In their view, Donald Trump is a right-wing extremist. What they failed to understand is there's a difference between process extremism and policy extremism. Now, I prefer, I fear process extremism more than I fear policy extremism. That's why I voted for Harris, because Trump is definitely a process extremist.
What do you mean by process extremist?
Well, the way by which your policies get through. So undemocratic means to certain ends, right? He was much more undemocratic, at least in his...
Yeah, elites really care about process. I don't think regular people care as much about norms and process.
Rhetoric. And so, and certainly in his actions after January 6th and these kinds of things. So yeah, the process extremism is real, but because of the myth of left and right, they couldn't see that process extremism is different than policy extremism. And when you look at Donald Trump, he is definitely not a policy extremist. They got blindsided by this. He captured the median voter because he holds the positions of the median voter. When you're saying the Republican Party has moved to the right, oh, they've adopted extreme policies, it's simply not true. And yet all of the Democratic operatives were thinking in terms of the myth of left and right. So they had that in their heads. You go down the list of things that Trump believes. He believes in closing the southern border. So does a majority of the American people. He believes in tariffs. So does a majority of the American people. His view on race is much closer to the American people than Kamala Harris, despite all the rhetoric about him being a fascist and these kinds of things. So they were blindsided because they bought into the myth of left and right and couldn't craft an electoral strategy around what Trump actually was, which is a process and not policy extremism.
And even they seem to be moving away from kind of a more progressive identity politics focused emphasis in their convention. I mean, obviously Harris, any presidential election, you win or lose for a ton of reasons, including things that are beyond your control.
Right. This is from Halperin.
Hans, I wanted to ask you about one more thing.
You're not going to ask me on the market? Sell. Things are too high. Sell. It's frothy. Get out.
Yeah, it is frothy. Comey pled guilty today. Trial set for January. I'm just curious if you think that thing will ever go. I'm played not guilty. Sorry. Sorry. I just wonder if you think that thing will ever go to trial.
Oh, I don't know. No idea. No idea on that one. I mean, I guess they got to do jury selection. I don't know. It seems like the government wants to move forward. When the government wants to move forward on cases, they tend to, but maybe they get thrown on technicality. I don't know.
Pretty speedy trial. Yeah, it's weird. Some experts say it'll be thrown out. That's what I think. Others experts say it's just not the kind of thing that will get thrown out. I think this judge will throw it out. We'll see. All right. One last word from one last sponsor, and then your question. So please raise. And tried it. An opportunity to see if it'll allow you to sleep better and feel.
That's what people say in private, only in public. So the fact that the Israelis are confirming it in public, that seems significant. But maybe that's a couple hours old. I could have missed that.
Maybe it's just a report on their news. But anyway, I find it's interesting going to the Illinois and Portland thing. It's interesting from a southern state that they find it so strange that the federal government would deploy National Guard.
Right. Remember, it was the most moral, upstanding thing in the world to deploy the National Guard and federal troops to enforce left-wing priorities like civil rights. But now when Donald Trump wants to deploy federal troops and National Guard to increase law and order and reduce crime, that's like the worst thing in the world, right?
Right. Like my father had to go to school with National Guardsmen in Columbia, South Carolina. Now, granted, not equating the issues, right? But to preface my comments, but I mean, I feel like there's plenty of precedent for the federal government to use National Guard to either protect their interests or what they deem as, I don't know if this is a civil rights issue, but a civilian rights. I find it very
right. It was considered the most moral, most upstanding, most elevated, most transcendent thing in the world. Use federal troops and the National Guard to push and protect and impose civil rights on all sorts of southern states. And now it's like the worst thing in the world to use the National Guard to impose other priorities. So I finally finished Alexander de Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America. And one thing that jumped out at me is that Tocqueville talks about democracy, equality, freedom, tyranny, and he treats these ideas as just obviously objective and global in meaning rather than contingent. Contingent means depending on, right? Depending on the particular situation, right? He treats these ideas as if they're just permanent objective features of human nature, right? But they're all historically contingent institutions with different meanings in different contexts. What I mean by freedom is different what a socialist means by freedom, what a reformed Jew means by freedom, what a trans activist means by freedom, right? So for de Tocqueville, democracy isn't a form of government, it is an epoch of the human spirit, right? Equality isn't a political goal, it is a metaphysical condition. Freedom and tyranny aren't dependent on a hero system or on a situation, they're just objective universal moral archetypes, right? He's not so much describing a democracy, he's describing democracy as some kind of transcendent objective universal destiny. So by equality, he means a Protestant property-owning 19th century French-American form of equality, a narrow social construct, not some kind of universal psychological constant. When he talks about freedom, he means freedom in an American Protestant civic participation, moral restraint sense. Right? It's perhaps classic 19th century European hubris, right? Projecting particular Western historical experiences as human universals. Marx did it with social class, Hegel did it with the spirit, and Tocqueville with equality, right? Each took one development within the European tradition and then declared it as the key to humanity's evolution, right? His insights are dazzling. They don't really stand up, right? They are moral theater, right? This is what equality feels like to a displaced French nobleman in the early industrial age of the United States, right? They fail as science, right? If he admitted that the democracy he is talking about was a time and place contingent experiment in Anglo-Protestant civic life in America, not some kind of timeless law of humanity, the book would lose grandeur, but would gain in truth. All right, he confused a temporary provincial transformation for some kind of cosmic revelation, which may be magnificent as literature, may be how they do it in the humanities. It's really shaky as far as truth, right? And then he talks all about the evils of democracy, right? A ton of melodrama in this book, right? And his warnings about the evils of democracy feel much more emotional than empirical. You can feel his aristocratic anxiety vibrating. And it was Alan Bloom, I think, who wrote in The Closing the American Mind, which came out, was it 1987, who is the Proust of the Zulus? Or you can also ask, who is the Zulu of the Prousts, right? Proust and his ilk had certain geniuses and talents, and Zulu warriors had certain geniuses and talents that you would not find in, say, European priests, right? Different groups have different gifts, right? De Tocqueville attributes way too much to democracy, right? He had one idea, and then he tried to force his idea onto all sorts of things where it didn't really belong, right? He sees the world through this single prism, right? The democratic revolution is the fate of humanity. Like, religion's going to soften, literature will become sentimental, politics will be centralized, families will be weak, or because of democracy and the equality that brings with it, right? He over attributes to democracy all sorts of things. There's not really much reason to believe that people in democracies are more petty and more self-absorbed than other people. So when I was finishing off de Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America, I thought it contrasted very poorly with Charles Darwin's book on the origin of species by means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. So Charles Darwin, I think, is the most important truth optimizing work of the past, 250 years. Number one, Charles Darwin does not overstate his case. 2, he doesn't try to apply his ideas where they don't belong. 3, he keeps saying, oh, if evidence for this is found, then my hypothesis is invalidated. So Darwin keeps offering ways to invalidate his ideas. Tocqueville did none of this. So it was a work of seeking truth. It's a work of science. Origin of Species is 100 times superior to Democracy in America, right? Democracy in America feels like a classic humanities approach, philosophical approach, where it's all about your style, your feelings, your vibe, rather than pursuing truth, right? I just become annoyed when an author has one good idea and then they overstate it. Right? Darwin, to me, is a model of disciplined, empirical truth optimization. He builds his arguments brick by brick. He admits his uncertainty. He continually invites falsification of his theories. He's transparent about his methods, his proportions, right? De Tocqueville is a moralist, right? Darwin says, if my hypothesis fails here, then my whole theory collapses. Tocqueville says, oh, behold, the universal spirit of democracy, it explains everything. Right? The humanities, frequently you find them just inflating this one insight into an overarching worldview and then keep restating it with new moral colors instead of testing it against contrary data. It's a rhetorical method. It's not seeking truth. The origin of species endures because it's empirical, it's scientific, it's falsifiable, it's cumulative. Right? Democracy in America endures as literature because it gives shapes to moods, because it is so flattering to intellectuals. Right? Tocqueville's work, Democracy in America, reminds me of all these philosophers and all these humanities professors who begin with their own feelings, their own intuitions, and essentially go from there rather than following the data. Right? Starting with their own perceptions rather than with evidence.
Interesting. I guess when you're I guess it was Democrats back then that didn't like it, a different form of Democrat, but I find it rich on that end. But I just felt that was I wonder where you guys think the end game is for this, because it seems like Trump has no stop, and I guess maybe you can, Hans, you could talk about it because you're on the Hill, but I feel like there's going to be no end to this on the Trump side. I wonder where this end game plays.
It's not a Hill question; it's the courts. I mean, it's a good question, but it ends in the courts.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like, you know, this is
no, I'm not saying that just this incident. I'm talking about the general, like we're gonna continue this, like we're gonna use the guard or federal officials to clean up the streets, if you will, across the United States. Do you think this is a Marc? Maybe you can speak.
Okay, what other highlights do I have for
your
you?
main part of your job is always going to be asking why. Accountants would have said that's absurd. But now that's all they do because the machine does all the arithmetic.
Right. AI doesn't have judgment.
Everywhere where we've got people, is people applying judgment.
In the examples you gave, it also means that AI could lead to less inequality in the workforce because it means somebody paired with an AI could do higher order work than they're currently doing today.
Well,
depending
maybe.
on the role.
It depends on judgment. In other words, what we don't know yet is, will judgment be more evenly distributed than prediction was, or will it be even more skewed? If it's more skewed, then there'll be even more inequality. If it's more uniform, then there'll be less inequality, and we just don't know yet.
So what does that tell us about what we should be learning in school? So if we can easily see judgment and experience are key for the future of work, what should colleges be doing? How should they be reorganizing themselves? I mean, what conversations are you having here?
Trade-offs. So much has to do with it. Rather than learning facts, learning trade-offs, and therefore always asking why. So, in other words, let's say in history, rather than memorizing the facts, was at this point in history, given these things that just had happened, was a better decision to do this or do that? Why? And every time you ask the question why,
I mean, it's a good question,
then you're
but
forced to think about the trade-offs. Everything you need an answer for, because that is how the role that we'll play in guiding the AI. And so it feels very much like we're heading into a world where the reason we have to be so good at why is because the AI does all the work sort of up to that point and then stops.
So we're all going to become executives, miniature chief executive officers of a bunch of AI systems. In the same way you would ask your team, why did you pick that? Why is this your presentation? We all have to do that for each and everything we do. So when you think about college then, how easy is it for a college to be redesigned this way? I mean, is college still worthwhile? But how and what college teaches needs to fundamentally be reorganized? Or are we going to get to a point where it's not going to be the investment that it once was?
Yeah, it's a great question. So definitely it needs to be reorganized. That feels for sure true. What's less obvious is the current incarnation of university the best way to teach the skill?
Right. What kind of murder rate is acceptable? Whoops.
Continue this, like we're going to use the guard or federal officials to clean up the streets, if you will, across the United States. Do you think this is a Marc, maybe you can speak. Do you think this is a multi-year deal, or is this just going to be until Trump sees it no longer as politically advantageous?
Good question. Hans in a better position to say, but
it does. It's not. It does. I'd be surprised if it goes beyond Trump.
Yeah.
But Trump seems to be pretty unique in wanting to push limits. But he's also showing. He's also, this is my sort of what I. When you're talking to Democratic sources, like everything that Trump's doing, just let's be certain you're clear, you're comfortable with President AOC doing the same.
Right.
And it's like, so you want to take a share of intel? Okay, well, imagine what happens when President Sanders or President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are you comfortable with them taking a share in Northrop Grumman? I don't know, just so presidents tend to kind of build on each other.
Happy to have them call Attorney General Larry Tribe and say, please indict Ted Cruz.
So did I play this
politics
excerpt
of personal destruction
a couple of weeks ago?
And lawfare. I mean, it's not like a 20th or 21st century phenomenon, but it's certainly because of social media and digital. It's certainly since post Watergate. It's a horse of a different color, and it's extremely dangerous. And I think the main reason to be pessimistic is we had 3 straight 2-term presidents, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, all of whom put ending this kind of stuff central to their candidacies and their presidencies. All of them 1-2 terms. First time we've had 3 straight 2-term presidents since the founding of the Republic. And yet each of them left office with the country more polarized and more lawfare than when they took over after 8 years. So I don't know what the dynamics are or dynamics would be exactly, or who the leader exactly would be. But I know the only way to think about trying to fix it is to do some pretty rigorous analysis of the incentive structure that exists now. Why is it in politics?
Incentive structure, that's key, right? Humans respond to incentives. We want a better world, better society, better community. a better life, we have to realign our incentives.
Politicians' interest to do this, because the vast majority of Americans, I believe, and I think the data is quite clear in this, they're not interested in that. They're not interested in lawfare. Polls show it's not very popular. So why do politicians do it even though it's unpopular? Because the bases love it. The bases demand it. So I think you got to figure out how you elevate the power of the center, and of those not even on the center who don't want this. You got to figure out how to elevate their power. And I think if you do that, you could be optimistic that it could end.
Well, one of the things, Marc, it seems to me, is the implication of what you're saying is, as long as we're this polarized, lawfare is going to be a fact of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is pretty depressing. It's pretty depressing thought.
It works, except as you pointed out, it didn't work in the case of Trump. And one of my remedies to almost every one of these things is the media needs to be fair, right? One of the great things about the free press is you guys will call out Trump for this, but you called out the Democrats for it too. Too much of our media doesn't. They just are for the home team, whether that's the blue team or the red team. And I think you need to call it out. And if it's called out, the politicians have less of an incentive to do it. If you look at the press coverage of the 4 Trump indictments, and I disagree with Joe about probably every one in the way you characterize them, but the press rooted for those indictments, rooted for them, hoped they would stop Trump from winning. And that turned a lot of people against the Democrats, even if they didn't like Trump, because they thought that was unfair.
Can I sneak in here with one other thought? I came to the free press. I was a New York Times person, columnist, writer for 12, 13 years.
Fabled. You left out the word fabled. You were fabled. Fabled New York Times columnist.
There you go.
Sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
If only Andrew Rosenthal agreed with you. But I was a committed reader, and it was not until I came to the free press that the thought ever even occurred to me that something might be wrong with any of these prosecutions. And again, it was my colleague Eli Lake writing about Alvin Bragg.
Meaning prosecutions of Trump.
That turned the light bulb on in my head. And it's like, oh, there is another way of looking at this. There are people who have different ideas about this. My point is just, if you're on the left and your diet is the Times and the other liberal media who were, I agree with you entirely, Marc, we're rooting for this, not just on the op-ed pages, but also in the news pages. You just have no perception that there is another point of view here.
Powerful. That's Joe Sznycer, formerly of the New York Times.
For the Daily Mail, was the day Comey was fired by Donald Trump. And right after Comey was fired, Stephen Colbert, sorry, I had a little brain freeze because I was thinking of Jimmy Kimmel. Stephen Colbert was taping his show. And of course, his audience is a bunch of liberals. And he comes out in his monologue and he says, just a few minutes ago, Donald Trump fired James Comey. And the audience is confused about what to do. Because on the one hand, most of them, when they thought James Comey, they thought, well, this is the guy who helped Trump get elected. So great that he was fired. On the other hand, if Trump fired him, he must be a good guy. And the audience is kind of paralyzed, cheering, stunned silence. They don't know what to do. And Colbert's confused too. Like he thinks it's bad that they're firing Comey, but on the other hand, Comey's the villain. So my point is that even back then, even before the indictment, just in the beginning of the Trump administration, like in May of his first term, even back then, Comey confused everybody because the press, knocked him down after he helped Trump win the election. And then, the press rallied to him after Trump fired him as FBI director. He's a confusing guy and a confused guy, but the through line of the whole thing is he's a bad guy. And he's lauded, and partly by himself and his PR efforts, he's lauded as some hero.
He's also an incredibly weird guy. I Marc, I'm sure you saw
Yes.
his clip about Taylor Swift on his Substack recently,
Oh, I
talking about how
did.
he's deadpanning right to camera in front of a wall with the lens like an inch away from his face, seemingly, about how he's a Swiftie. His social media posts about, there was like the 86 one, he just posts random pictures of trees. He seemed to be flirting with the idea that he could run for president at one point. He's extremely strange, and I wonder how he lasted so long in Washington, even before the
Yeah.
Trump-Clinton race.
These are framed. This is framed perfectly. You know, it takes a lot to creep me out. His Instagram videos, they creep me out. I want to turn away. It's like watching like the horror movie Freaks.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, I think, making a lot of people's blood boil in conversation with Ezra Klein, who now sort of infamously penned an op-ed about how Charlie Kirk had been doing politics the right way, exactly the right way. He then had Ben Shapiro on and talked more, fleshed out those feelings before the interview with Ben, which was taped before what happened to Charlie Kirk. And he's gotten an enormous amount of heat for the left, just absolutely it's just a total pile-on of Ezra Klein, and he sort of hashed it out with Ta-Nehisi Coates. And this is what Ta-Nehisi Coates had to say, and what I would argue is the critical moment of a very long conversation and podcast. Let's roll it.
I don't take any joy in saying this, but we sometimes soothe ourselves by pointing out that love...
Whenever I hear people say, I don't take any joy in saying this, it always feels like they're taking a great deal of joy. Whenever someone tells me, like, I'm being honest, I always feel like they're lying to me.
Acceptance, warmth, that these are powerful forces. I believe they are.
There's no love without hate. Anything that you revere, anything that you want to preserve, anything that you want to protect, anything that you love, you're going to hate that which threatens it.
I also believe hate is a powerful force. I believe it's a powerful, powerful unifying force. And I think Charlie Kirk was a hate monger. You know, I really need to say this over and over again. I have a politic that rejects violence, that rejects political violence. I take no joy in the killing of anyone, no matter what they said. But if you ask me what the truth of his life was, you know, the truth of his public life, I would have to tell you it's hate. I would tell you, I'd have to tell you it is the usage of hate and the harnessing of hate towards political ends.
Marc, that was on a New York Times podcast with a Vanity Fair contributing editor. That's what Ta-Nehisi Coates is. He's also a professor at Howard University.
I cried on a conference call today, talking just about the last couple of weeks. I'd like to extend the presumption of grace to people. And, you know, that guy was not speaking on teleprompter. He was speaking off the top of his head. So maybe he regrets saying what he said, but fuck him. Because this man was not a hater, just manifestly not. And there's so much evidence on the public record. You didn't have to know him personally to know that he wasn't a hater. Disagree with him. Charlie said some things I didn't disagree with. He said some things I didn't particularly fancy, but he was not a hater. And he's got a widow and 2 young kids and so many friends who loved him. And this guy's on the national town square talking bullshit about someone he didn't know and saying really hurtful things. And the reason it matters, besides that it reflects that the New York Times will give a microphone to someone so ignorant, is because this is what's wrong with the desire for people to make money and get acclaim off of saying false, negative things about people they don't know.
Bezos and the Washington Post. Now, Jeff Bezos, I don't know if it's fair to pin him to the left or to the right. I mean, he was pretty supportive of Obama. He was very supportive of the Washington Post's approach to Trump 1.0 and the democracy dies in darkness tagline until that all started to go very poorly for the Post. But the new opinion editor over at the Washington Post is Adam O'Neill. They have announced they want to go in a more libertarian direction, but mostly pro-American direction, is how they phrased it. Free markets, free people, which is the Wall Street Journal editorial boards or the Wall Street Journal's mission. I forget whether it's from their editorial board or their paper's general mission in the past, but that's basically what they do. And all of this is to say, the Washington Post is embarking on this very expensive project to right the ship, as Bezos sees it, and they're trying to do kind of what CBS seems to be trying to do with potential free press acquisition, and what the New York Times is definitely not doing based on what we just discussed from Ta-Nehisi Coates to Nicole Hannah-Jones. So I wanted to get your take, Marc, on this interview that Adam O'Neill gave to, this is his first interview as opinion editor of the Washington Post. And he gives the interview to Joseph Wolfson of Fox News, believe it or not. And one of the things he says here is our readers are overwhelmingly liberal, right? And they're all overwhelmingly located in blue states, and just a few blue states, and they're overrepresented on the coast. And so one way to look at it would be to say, well, if you're nonpartisan, if you have highly partisan readership, they may be offended by that. And maybe that's true, but looking forward as I rebuild, I just want to see it as an opportunity to expand our reach. He says, frankly, a lot of people don't trust the Post, and they don't trust the mainstream media broadly. It goes on to say, it's possible highly partisan readers may not want to subscribe to the Washington Post or read the Washington Post anymore. Just as a business decision, what do you make of this on the business front and then on the content front, Marc?
Yeah, I mean, I deal with this every day in building the company I'm trying to build, where we want all voices on two-way. We don't want just people in the mushy middle, moderate, centrist, and independents. We want the people on the farthest left, the farthest right, so people can learn from each other. And when I put a liberal person on, I hear from many, not all, but many of my conservative audience, and they say, I'll never watch again. I'll never watch again. That person was so liberal. And then the same thing, I'll have somebody conservative on, the liberals will say, I can't watch your platform. And I say, you should be thanking me for giving you the opportunity to listen to a well-curated list of people who are telling you what the other half of America is thinking, and you have an opportunity on our platform to question them.
That's right.
The Washington Post, like all papers on the news side, not all, but most, was liberal. They didn't say it. They claimed they were fair, but they covered conservatives and Republicans in a much different manner than they covered Democrats. Their editorial board was all liberals. And Jeff Bezos said what the owner of the Los Angeles Times, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, with whom I host a show on two-way, what he said, which is in effect, I'm not quoting him, in the Washington Post, Bezos said the same thing. Why should everyone on my editorial board be liberal? It doesn't make any sense. Now, the Post editorial board under the, what's the gentleman's name who passed away? I'm blanking on his name. They weren't far left, but they were still left of center, and they had far more liberal columnists than conservatives, although they had some somewhat conservative, although not really too many MAGA, although Mark Thiessen writes at that on that page. And I think what they're doing is going back to the Michael Jordan adage about why Michael Jordan, a Democrat, didn't endorse candidates, because Republicans buy sneakers too. Republicans, conservatives are interested in news too.
Speak to this a little bit, because I don't know if I've ever said this before, but earlier in the year, I was in talks about potentially this job with the Washington Post or other jobs at the Washington Post, and I ended up taking myself out of the running for it. Basically, what people can take from that is that while I think there's some really laudable ambitions happening at the Washington Post and some really interesting people over there now, I really wonder, Marc, if what you just described about the Michael Jordan model in 2025 into the 2030s is feasible, given how we have polarized into a very democratized media landscape where niche followings, like two ways actually and put up this moment of Kamala Harris at Howard University. She actually recently got panned in the Washington Post by the editorial board for, here's the quote, the former VP has managed to put on a book tour even less compelling than her presidential campaign. That's well said. Let's take a listen to what she said at Howard.
The history that you are being taught. This is a moment in time in our country and the world where I hope everything that you are seeing tells you we need you. We need you to lead. We need you to be strong. You are leaders right now. You were born leaders. And what this place will do is nurture that and let it nurture that, nurture it in each other, because I am counting on you as a very proud bison. I am counting.
So Kamala Harris is, of course, a Howard alumna. Marc, did you find that inspirational? Are you nurturing? That reach you?
Fred Hyatt was the name of the Washington Post head board editor who passed away. A very good guy.
It looks like Marc might have just briefly frozen. Like Kamala Harris. It's like Kamala Harris's brain. I can just vamp about Kamala Harris's frozen brain.
I want to see how it sells over the long term, because books like that, sometimes burn out after a week or two. She just, as Bill Clinton once said about Mitt Romney, that's a person who shouldn't have a job that requires them to speak in public. She just, I mean, no, I don't think it's inspirational, but I think it's also just like, it's word salad and unfocused and awkward. And she's had plenty of practice. It wasn't her first time. She's just not that good at that.
Shocking, given her choice of career.
Yeah.
But it doesn't appear to be winding down at all if she has her way going forward. She seems to have pretty clear political ambitions into the future. Marc, before I let you run, I'm told that you have a pretty strong take on the awful news that came out of TMZ today about Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban separating after 19 years of marriage. Now, the report is that they've separated, not fully divorced, but Marc, it seems like it's been a tough day for you on this front.
Well, I don't wish them any unhappiness, of course, but I'm a big student of their marriage. I used to watch with fascination. First of all, we're dealing with a woman. I'm exercising my inner Maureen Callahan here.
Incredible.
We're dealing with a woman who was married to Tom Cruise. Okay.
Yes.
So let's just stipulate that, maybe her personal choices aren't the very best.
She's probably a little weird.
Yeah. And then, I don't know, I'm going to go back and pull the clips, but every time I saw them at an award show, it just seemed spooky. The energy between them seemed spooky. So count me down as not the least bit surprised that this marriage did not go on forever and ever. And I'll be curious to see who she dates next, because maybe the third time's the charm.
Marc, that is a crazy take. I think you're one of the only people who's willing to say right now they're not surprised by what's happened in the Urban-Kidman marriage. He very movingly has credited her with helping him with his addiction issues, and they've always been seen as such a steady couple. They do each other's events a lot.
Yeah.
But you saw this coming.
Go look at the
use.
Okay, let's get a little bit more here on evolutionary psychology, moral foundations theory, moral systems. David Pinsof here.
Moral systems as well. And maybe not. So in the paper, I sort of take great pains to distinguish between politics and morality, because I think they're too often conflated in a way that causes a lot of confusion. And the reason they're conflated is because politics almost always masquerades as morality in order to achieve its political objectives. That is, in order to rally people to our side, we have to convince people that our side is the good side, the moral side, the virtuous side, and the other side is evil, unfair, disrespectful, etc. So morality is our chief weapon in our political arsenal, and that is why it is often so easy to confuse morality with politics as if they were the same thing. That is, to confuse moralism with morality. And in the paper, I try to differentiate politics and morality in the following way. I describe politics as being centrally about conflict and loyalty to one or the other side of that conflict. That's what I think politics is ultimately about. Okay. And morality is ultimately about cooperation, that is, working together for a mutual benefit, and impartiality to either side of a conflict and working to resolve conflicts. So in that sense, once you cleave politics from morality, morality starts to look pretty nice. So in that sense, I don't think that morality as distinguished from politics can be described in the same sort of cynical terms as being about, self-interested flouting of moral principles. I think we do have genuine moral principles that are shared between liberals and conservatives. I think the prevailing view that ideologies are about moral disagreement is actually backwards. I think at the heart of our political disputes is moral agreement. That is, we are using the same moral language, the same moral intuitions to try to win political conflicts. We're trying to cast our side as the fair side, as the side for freedom, the side for patriotism, the side for compassion. and we couldn't have those political fights if both sides didn't care about compassion, freedom, fairness, etc. So I think we have common moral intuitions that partisans compete to activate, and that underlies a lot of our political discourse. Sexually restricted and uptight about sexual promiscuity, I might be more inclined to become religious. And if I'm more sexually promiscuous, I might be less inclined to become religious. I might abandon my religious upbringing. Shows us that we're really not as different as we think we are. That we don't have these deep-seated worldviews that are completely clashing and at odds with one another. We don't have fundamentally different moral principles. We basically have the same moral principles. We all care about fairness. We all care about helping people who are truly in need. We all care about welcoming people into our group when they pose no threat and when they're willing to be an asset to our group. And the differences really come from our beliefs about those things. About patchwork of inconsistent beliefs.
Right.
That if you think that your side has a coherent, principled moral philosophy and you see someone deviating from that, well, then you might think that they're evil or insane or stupid, right? But if you see your side as not having a coherent or principled philosophy, then you might be a little bit softer on people who might deviate from it, because if they're deviating from it, maybe they're deviating from it in a good way. To undertake. And how I think about the emotional aspect of meaning is basically it's evolution's way of telling you that this activity is in your long-term fitness interests. It might not pay off right now. It might not pay off immediately. It may not pay off at all, but probabilistically and in the long run, it's good to invest in this activity. So, if you think about your biological fitness, it's very straightforward in the case of raising a family. It takes a...
So this is UCLA evolutionary psychologist David Pinsof talking on the Dissenter podcast.
Really long time to rear a child to maturity and to make sure that they're successful and well off and high status and going to give you lots of grandkids. That's a very difficult and long run project that will have lots of setbacks and obstacles and discomforts and pains and conflicts. Right? Any parent will tell you that their kid can be a pain in the ass and it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So we need and bolstering that alliance, making sure that everyone is committed to the alliance and purging dissenters and purging traitors from the alliance and making sure that they gain power and superiority and dominance over rival alliances. That is also a long-term project that is often beset with many setbacks and obstacles. And I think many people gain a lot of meaning from their political allegiances, and that can be either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you want to look at it. Cultivating a valuable skill is also a long-term thing that will pay off in terms of raising your status, but may be beset with obstacles. Helping others, putting others in your debt, that might pay off in the long run. If you're ever in need, then you'll have a lot of people who feel grateful for you and are willing to help you in that situation. But in order to be helped in that situation, you must have provided a lot of help to others before that. And so that's why helping others feels meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So that's emotional meaning. Sorry, I went on a very long tangent there.
No, that's fine. That's great. So,
as unique to intellectuals, I think we all have emotional meaning.
Sure.
I think that's a biological adaptation. Then there's intellectual meaning. That is what we think is objectively meaningful. That is what we think is rationally defensible as meaningful. What we think the coherent and principled answer is to the meaning of life, what our actual reasons are for living and caring for families and supporting our political tribe. That is very much unique to intellectuals, at least in my personal experience. I could be wrong. I'm happy to see some data challenging me, but it seems like if you poll the general population and you ask them, how much they think about existentialism or nihilism or Camus or Sartre, or how much they care about having a coherent worldview or philosophy, I would bet you that you would see highly educated people answering yes to those questions at a much higher frequency. And so in that sense, I don't think most people care about the meaning of life in that intellectual sense.
Whenever I think about the intellectual kind of meaning of...
I find it really surprising that intellectuals sort of hold that quote in reverence. to me, that's kind of, I find it a really
the quote by Socrates, "The unexamined life is not worth living."
kind of disgusting quote, to be perfectly honest. I find it elitist and smugly superior. It's an implicit dig at people who don't spend their whole life philosophizing. It's basically saying that those people, their lives aren't worth living. That's a terrible sentiment. Absolutely despicable when you really think about it. So it continuously surprises me that intellectuals hold up this quote as as this symbol of meaning and virtue. I think it's just smug elitism masquerading as philosophy.
Yeah, but I mean,
has an innate or deep-seated desire for.
He's saying the human mind doesn't have this innate or deep-seated desire for universal and philosophical truths, for abstract truths, right? We have an evolved desire for truth only in concrete, practical, relevant situations that are vitally important for our own welfare. That's why we did not evolve to be gullible with regard to vital things for our own welfare.
Truth about abstract, irrelevant matters. I think we certainly have evolved a desire for truth in concrete, practical, relevant situations. That is, we want to know if there really is a tiger over there. We want to know if this canoe really has a hole in it or not. We really want to know if our tool works or if this food is safe to eat. Those are the kinds of things that we evolved to care about and evolved to care about having accurate beliefs about. But when it comes to the meaning of life, how on earth would that affect your fitness in any way? Why would we care about having a correct view of that?
So if something doesn't affect your fitness, then it's BS. It's a status game.
That strikes me as a very evolutionarily implausible desire. So I think if we're going to explain discourse on the meaning of life, we cannot appeal to any deep-seated motive for truth seeking in these matters. I think we have to look in other directions. I think we have to look to the social aspect of these debates, because after all, debates are social. They're not just one individual thinking to himself or herself. If that's what pondering the meaning of life was like, it would be unrecognizable to us. No, these discussions are very social. They have all sorts of social implications, all sorts of status implications. We tend to praise people who have, well thought out, uplifting philosophies of life as humane, as wise, as virtuous, and we really seek that kind of acclaim and esteem from our peers. I think philosophers love that kind of acclaim. They love to be called wise and humane and insightful. So I think the key here is thinking about what an intellectual is. What is an overeducated person? What trait makes them that way? And I think the clearest answer is that they are hyper reasoners. Their reasoning faculty is very online and intensely activated all the time. That's what I think an intellect. They're people who love to reason, and we all have reasoning faculties. Some of us have stronger reasoning faculties, and we like to reason more frequently than others. But we all have it, and I think to understand why intellectuals debate the meaning of life, we have to understand what reasoning is and what it's all about and why reasoning evolved. And the theory I like most about what reasoning is comes from Hugo Mercier, who I believe you've had on the podcast before.
Yep.
And he thinks that reasoning evolved for two purposes. One is arguing, and the other is rationalizing. So we reason to win debates and resolve conflicts in our favor. And we also reason to excuse, justify, and rationalize our behavior so that we look good to our peers. That's basically what reasoning is all about, according to Hugo Mercier. There are all sorts of nuances here, and I don't want to give a whole overview of his theory, but that's the gist. And if we see reasoning as fundamentally about arguing and rationalizing, then we can see why these hyper-reasoning weirdos are so obsessed with the meaning of life. What they're doing is they're finding a way to win arguments with one another and rationalize their lives. That is, they're trying to come up with a justification for their life choices, the justification for why they support the haphazard and arbitrary political coalition they support. They're trying to come up with a rationalization for why they're alive at all. That's a big question. That why don't we commit suicide? I think the answer is there are clear evolutionary reasons why we would be afraid of committing suicide, but that doesn't sound as pretty as, oh, I'm alive because I want to pursue some high-minded value, or I want to make the world a better place, or pursue justice or equality, or any other value. So I think basically what conversations and debates about the meaning of life are a kind of status competition, and the status competition might take a variety of forms. It might take the form of virtue status or wisdom status, or whatever. But I think that's ultimately what it's all about. And apologies for that cynical view, but I think it might help with
socially signaling their intellectual prowess or something like that. Also because lots of that has clear fitness benefits, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, if we're trying to explain a costly human behavior, a costly investment of time and energy, I think we have to try to explain it first in ways that make evolutionary sense. And the way you described it...
Right. So I got up at 3 a.m., right? I spent many hours preparing this show. Why did I do it? Because I'm playing a status game, but I don't think of me playing a status game. I'm just pursuing truth and trying to make the world a better place.
As social signaling and status competition, that makes a whole lot of evolutionary sense. The idea that we are intrinsically interested in the abstract meaning of life for its own sake makes no evolutionary sense whatsoever. So I think all else equal, we should favor the theories and explanations that make more evolutionary sense, because we know evolution is true, and all of our theories should ultimately be consistent with it. And that's my pitch for a Darwinian.
Functions does morality serve exactly? Because we have this idea, or this common idea, that morality is really about making us good or better people. But is that really what morality is about?
Yeah, so I don't think it's what it's about. So I have a post on Everything is Bullshit called Morality is Not Nice, in which I argue that morality is not, in fact, nice. It's quite mean. If you think about all of the awful stuff that has happened throughout history, it has all had a very high-minded moral justification. Purges, pogroms, inquisitions, genocides, eugenics, conquests, colonialization, you name it. It all comes accompanied with a moral justification. We cannot commit injustice without thinking we're pursuing justice. We cannot behave immorally without thinking we're behaving morally. We need our moral justifications and our moral rationalizations in order to effectively mobilize groups against rivals. So that is what I think a lot of morality is about. It's about mobilizing groups against rivals. And the way we do that is by creating self-serving narratives that frame the group as morally superior and the rivals as morally inferior. I think way too much of the scholarly literature on morality takes an overly sunny view of what it's all about. That is, if you think about morality from a Darwinian perspective, ultimately it exists because it helped our ancestors outcompete their rivals. That is, ancestors who had the genes for morality did better, got more stuff than ancestors who didn't have those genes. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how did they get more stuff than their non-moral rivals? Well, there are only so many ways, right? They could either physically exclude them from that stuff, just not interact with them or just avoid them. That's not very nice. They could violently exclude them. They could hurt them or kill them. Not very nice. They could lie to them and to keep them away. That's another tactic. Really, there's no way that one group of primates can get more stuff than another group of primates systematically throughout evolutionary history without being mean to that other group of primates. There's just no way to do it. So I think morality, while it is very much about cooperation, as a lot of scholars have argued, it also must necessarily have a competitive side. That is, there must be some kind of competition at the heart of it. Yes, we cooperate, but we cooperate to outcompete our rivals. Yes, we try to show off our virtue and to be good cooperative partners. But what we're doing there is we're competing with other people to be better cooperative partners than they are. And I think too often the competitive side of morality has been ignored in favor of the cooperative side, ironically, because that serves the functions of morality. That is, if I'm trying to mobilize a larger group than my rivals, I have to make it seem like my moral agenda is better for more people than it really is, that it's more sunny and cooperative than it really is, that it's less ugly and dark and competitive than it really is, in order to rally more people to my side and away from the other side. Society wants us to be. We oppose virtue signaling to signal our virtue. We bravely defy social norms so that people will praise us. We avoid being manipulative to get people to do what we want them to do. We avoid being defensive in order to ultimately defend ourselves. Those are just a few examples of social paradoxes. What's the common thread to all of them? The common thread is that they ultimately involve a signal that is concealed from both the signaler and the recipient. That is, the virtue signaler does not know that they are a virtue signaler, and neither do the recipients who award them virtue. If they thought of them as virtue signalers, they wouldn't award them virtue. They would think they were, narcissistic or whatever, right? The brave norm violator does not know that they're actually, in fact, just conforming to the norms of their particular subculture, and neither do the members of that subculture. The authentic person who is authentically expressing their true self does not know that they're behaving exactly how society wants them to behave, and neither does the society who praises them as authentic, right? So these are signals being sent that are concealed from both the signaler and the recipient.
And so why is it that things like status seeking and virtue signaling have to occur covertly for them to work?
Yeah, so the answer is kind of complicated. So I think it has to do with a couple cognitive abilities we have. One ability is that we are just eagerly in search of information about a person's character. We are likely to draw all sorts of inferences about them from the subtlest things they say and the subtlest behaviors they engage in. We want to know what kind of person. I want to know what kind of person you are, and I'm going to judge you in all sorts of ways, unconsciously and consciously, and draw inferences. Oh, you said this thing, that means that you're this type of person. So that's what I call cue-based inferences, using others' behaviors as a cue to their underlying traits. And then there's recursive mentalizing. So that's the ability to get inside other people's heads and think about what they might be thinking about, or what they might want, or what they might have intended. And the recursive part comes from embedding mental states inside other mental states. So for example, I want you to think that I'm smart, but I don't want you to think that I want you to think that I'm smart. Because if you thought that, you would think I was a douche, right? So that's an example of recursive mentalizing. There are thoughts about thoughts, beliefs about desires about thoughts, beliefs about intentions about thoughts, etc. That's a lot. Apologies. Let me get back to social paradoxes. Why does virtue signaling have to occur covertly? Well, because being an overt virtue signaler, trying to show off your virtue, that's a signal, but it has also at the same time become a cue of one's underlying vanity and self-absorption and selfishness and pettiness, and perhaps even one's low status. Maybe you're insecure about yourself because you're low status and you want to try to show off to improve your status. Whatever the reason, we draw all sorts of negative inferences about people when they overtly and conspicuously show off their virtue. So that means that if we want to gain virtue, we cannot let people know that we're virtue signaling. We have to somehow signal our virtue without making it seem like we're signaling our virtue. And one way of doing that is to hide the fact that we're virtue signaling, not merely from the people we're signaling to, but also from ourselves. That is, we deceive ourselves. We think we're not actually virtue signaling. We're pursuing some high-minded value. And the same story could be told about status. If you're a status seeker, people draw negative inferences about you. You're selfish, you're competitive, maybe you're low status and insecure. We don't like status seekers. So in order to achieve status, we must conceal the fact that we're trying to achieve status. That is, status seeking must occur covertly and must be disguised in high-minded, benevolent terms.
I mean, and this will be my last question. I was just about to ask you.
And that it makes us more successful at deceiving others if we can deceive ourselves first. Mm-hmm. And I think the general argument here is sound. And I think one way I like to frame it is in terms of a lawyer who practices their opening statement to themselves before they deliver it to the jury, right? Maybe they'll practice in front of the mirror. I don't know. But they want to make sure that they'll hear themselves giving the arguments. And if it's convincing to themselves and if it sounds good to themselves, then it probably sounds good to other people. And I think we do that with ourselves. That is, we first try out arguments on ourselves before we try them out on others. And what we're often arguing about is how good we are or how not bad we are. So we
Okay, that's David Pinsof.
Actually improve the lot of our...
All right, this guy is Sheldon Solomon, so he's a protege of Ernest Becker. He's essentially devoted his life to trying to provide evidence for the theories of Ernest Becker. So this is a lecture at the University of British Columbia, and the title is The Worm at the Core on the Role of Death in Life.
Ourselves and folks around us. And I'll just leave that one as is, but I do think it's a good one. And then finally he said, you know what? We will also be best served if we develop our theories and position them in the context of Darwin's ideas about...
So the he here is Ernest Becker.
Evolution by natural selection. Once again, not because the theory is necessarily true, which it is, by the way, but more so because it's the most successful theory in the history of scientific endeavors. And so with that in mind, what Becker asks us to do is to start with a single assumption. And there's only two assumptions, I think, today that we need to make. Assumption number one is just the basic Darwinian assumption that people share with all forms of life a basic biological predisposition towards staying alive in the service not only of survival, but also in terms of reproduction. Darwin called that the struggle for survival. A couple of head shakes for me for an emotional boost, if that makes sense. Living things like to stay alive. How's that? Is that okay? All right, this is Canada, and you can get away with that shit. But in America, you can't even say that without just storms of angry people charging the stage, trying to tear your heart out and show it to you while it's still beating before you die. But this is good that today, all right, living things like to stay alive.
What a horrible blood libel against those opposed to the theory of evolution. But on the other hand, it's funny and a horrible blood libel.
Live. All right, but Darwin also noticed, though, that different forms of life have radically different ways of accomplishing that most arduous task of persisting over time. Silly but obvious examples.
So this guy, Sheldon Solomon, he developed a theory based on the teaching of Ernest Becker. It's called terror management theory, right? How do we deal with the terror of being insignificant in a big universe?
Eagles have great eyesight. Bats can't see anything, but they hear well. Dogs can smell pretty good. Skunks smell pretty bad, but because...
Right, different forms of life have different gifts. And we're all incentivized to develop our own unique gift, right? To differentiate ourselves. That's the best way to survive, stay safe, adapt to reality, and to propagate our genes.
Because of that, they're able to stay alive. Well, what about people? Well, it turns out Darwin really anticipated modern psychology in many, many ways at various points in his intellectual life. And what Darwin pointed out is that people are in some ways a paradoxical form of life. And what he meant by that is when you look at the average human being in isolation from a purely physical point of view, it's not clear why we're here at all. We are, after all, not a particularly imposing species. We're not overly big. We're not overly fast. Our eyesight's not that great. Our sense of smell's even worse. We don't have sharp teeth. We don't have sharp claws. And the fact of the matter is, according to Darwin, that we're not biologically constructed to survive as independent individuals on our own. I don't want to clutter up our discussion today.
So we have a digestive system and a dental structure that is designed to eat meat. Right? A vegetarian diet is maladaptive. We also are designed to live within a tribe. Right? We are not designed to be individuals, right? Deciding right and wrong and being autonomous with the direction of our life without regard to family, friends, community.
Today, but is anybody familiar with John Locke? Anybody do John Locke? Do they do him at all? You know how John Locke says in A State of Nature, people are isolated and independent individuals who fend for themselves? It's one of the stupidest ideas in
Right, completely maladaptive.
The history of intellectual thought. And if we had more time, I would point out that most political philosophy in America is based on that patently erroneous assumption. But we'll save that.
Absolutely right. We are not primarily individuals with inalienable rights, right? We are primarily members of extended families. We don't primarily think up and develop our own morality. We inherit it from our extended family.
For another time, the point that Darwin makes is that we're not here by virtue of our physical prowess. We are here rather because we're highly gregarious or social creatures. And
right, the individualist life strategy is not an adaptive strategy. It is not a strategy that will work most effectively. Group strategy, extended family strategy, there's a winning strategy for life.
We're also tremendously intelligent creatures in a very particular way. All right, so none of us.
And we think more clearly, more effectively if we think socially, right? We think out loud and talk to each other and learn from each other.
Would be here if we had to survive on our own, but because we're social creatures, we can cooperate with each other in the service of constructing and maintaining a host of elaborate institutions that facilitate our collective survival. English translation, you wouldn't be alive by sundown if you had to chase a squirrel on the lawn with your bare hands in order to eat, right? But together we can build hospitals, we can build roads, we can build schools, Starbucks, as I see there's no shortage of here, and other things that make life as we know it not only possible, but fundamentally pleasant. Not only that, though, it's not only that we're social creatures, because after all, so are bees and termites and chimps. We are tremendously intelligent creatures in a very particular way. All right, and what Becker means by that, and here he borrows a phrase, and so do we, from a guy named Otto Rank, who was one of Freud's guys. Otto Rank said that people are so intelligent that we make the unreal real. As far as we know, people are the only form of life that can imagine something that does not yet exist and then have the audacity to transform our dreams into reality. All right, student types, work with me. Who was doodling pictures of helicopters in his notebooks in the 1500s? Good, yeah. And what did people say at the time? Crazy, right? And who's ever been on a plane or a helicopter? I know many of you have. Isn't that amazing that today we are routinely transported by what was originally dismissed as the doodlings of a madman? Only human beings, and some of you are too young, but I still love this, only human beings, as it were, to borrow a phrase from Nancy Reagan, can just say no to reality. If we don't like the world as it is, we can imagine how we might like it to be and alter it in accordance with our desires. I hope it's very obvious how the combination of excessive sociability combined with our fantastic intelligence is a tremendous recipe for survival and persistence over time. All right, well, so what? Let's go back in time. Darwin is in the 1850s, más o menos a couple of years. And let's go back to the 1840s and talk a little bit about the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. Who's ever heard of Kierkegaard? I'm looking at the time. I don't have a watch. I'm not checking my text messages, although it's tempting. Tremendous visionary. Kierkegaard said, you know what? People are so intelligent that we actually come to realize that we exist. In psychology these days, they call that self-awareness or self-consciousness. And basically, Kierkegaard said, you know what? We are the only form of life that is explicitly self-aware because it takes a ridiculously sophisticated cognitive apparatus to render yourself an object of your own subjective inquiry. All right, that's cumbersome, but I think the point is much more simple than that. At the risk of embarrassing myself, who's willing to admit that you're not only here cycle of self-reflection, but the point that Kierkegaard made is that you not only know that you're here, you know that you know, and you know that you know that you know. All right, well, so what? Kierkegaard's point is that a rose bush is here but doesn't necessarily know it. A skunk is here but doesn't necessarily know it. You're here and you know it, and that's the only other assumption I need you to grant. This in a little book called Fear and Trembling. All right, let's go with the awesome part of it first, because let's be happy for about 30 seconds. Kierkegaard see the dew shining on the leaves when the sun glances off it, and you are just wallowing in spontaneous exuberance at the prospect of life itself. How about is that if you are smart enough to know that you're here, if you're not a child or an idiot, you also recognize that, like all living things, you are of finite duration. I don't want to ruin your day before lunch, but that means you too will die.
Right, we fear death, we fear insignificance.
Are profoundly illuminating with regard to helping us understand the vagaries of the human condition. And then along the way, let me describe, at least briefly, the research that we've done that bears on some of these claims. We got interested.
So this lecture is called The Legacy of Ernest Becker, Death, Ideologies, and Cultures.
In Becker's ideas, because as graduate students, we were really trying to figure out, Jeff and Tom and I, how come people can't get along with other human beings who don't share their beliefs about the nature of reality. All right, back to James Joyce. I know you didn't finish the book, but who started it? Anybody get it?
So this guy did a bunch of fairly low-quality studies trying to find empirical evidence for the ideas of Ernest Becker.
Even 10 or 20 pages through. Page 9 of Ulysses, Stephen Dedalus says, "History is a nightmare from which I am trying to awaken." And the point that Joyce is making is that even the most benevolent glance at human history reveals an unflattering depiction of humankind. It's literally been one ongoing genocidal atrocity juxtaposed with the brutal subjugation of designated in-house inferiors. And if you read the newspaper or watch TV these days, I see no signs that these affectations have abated in the least. And Ernest Becker,
right, this is Sheldon Solomon.
Becker was tremendously concerned, in fact, almost singularly concerned with trying to understand what he ultimately came in his last book to call evil. What is it about us that we can't seem to tolerate another human being who worships a different God, who sings a different song, salutes a different...
Right, because an idea of a different God tarnishes our idea of God, right? It makes our narrative less grounded, less secure, right? It forces us to question things that we don't want to question, right? The more hero systems, right, the more we're tempted to think that our own particular hero system is subjective and not necessarily transcendent eternal truth, which is destabilizing and anxiety-producing.
Different flag. And what Becker did was to offer two, I think, profoundly disarming insights. One of them is very straightforward.
And I agree with the chat. Insignificance is more frightening than death. And that was Ernest Becker's insight. We fear insignificance more than we fear death.
And it is as follows. If your beliefs about the nature of reality serve a death-denying function, then whenever you run into somebody who doesn't share those beliefs, that's a problem whether you're aware of it or not, because very simply, if you accept the validity of an alternative conception of reality, you necessarily undermine the confidence with which you subscribe to your own, and then you expose yourself to the very anxiety that your beliefs were created.
Right. The more free the society, the more diverse the society, the more religious freedom in the society, the more anxiety, and the more mental illness.
Created to mitigate in the first place. And so what Becker proposed is that the mere existence of people who are different is psychologically problematic. Headshakes, if that makes sense, because I hope that does. Right? And then he says, oh yeah, but there's something else that may be even more discomforting. And this is as follows. Here he's following William James, and he says, our cultural constructions, our religions, our politics, our economics are very, very powerful. And at their best, they really do serve to reduce death anxiety by giving us the uplifting sense that we're valuable creatures in a meaningful universe. Nevertheless,
so I believe in one particular hero system. I believe in the traditional Jewish hero system that God gave the Torah, that the Jews are God's chosen people. And the existence of competing hero systems, right, that is anxiety producing, it's destabilizing, it's challenging, it's awkward. Right? It's easier to live within a bubble where there's only one dominant hero system.
They are, however, symbolic, whereas the problem of death is very physical. And what Becker insisted is that no symbol, and here he's following William James, no symbol is potent enough to ever completely eradicate death anxiety. And therefore, there's always going to be what we call residual death anxiety. Becker called it the rumbling of panic beneath the surface of consciousness. And then he said what we do with that residual death anxiety is we repress it, but because that's so unpleasant, we project it onto other individuals or group of individuals that we declare the all-encompassing repositories of evil that we must then destroy in order to rid the world of evil. So in one of the most striking statements in the book, Escape from Evil, Becker points out the poignant irony that most of the evil in the world comes from people trying to rid the world of evil. And what he points out is that when we do run into people who are different, the first thing that we do is we belittle or berate them. Of course, I believe that God created the earth in 6 days, but the people of the Fulani tribe in Mali, they believe the earth was created out of a giant drop of milk. Yeah, but those poor bastards are living in tents, wearing grass skirts, worshiping piles of sticks and mud. They don't have iPhones and iPads. I'm being silly. I hope you understand this. And the reason I'm being silly, but there's an important point to be made here, is that does it make sense when you belittle the possessor of an alternative conception of reality, you spare yourself the trouble of doubting your own? And if we had more time, I would try to demonstrate to each of us that we all do that. It's unfortunate, but it happens to be true. Some of us then automatically correct for that tendency, but our first reaction to people who are different is to belittle or berate. The next thing that we do, or we do it at the same time, is we try and get people to dispose of their ideas and to adopt ours instead. Christian missionaries are very good, but so are political proselytizers and Tupperware salespeople. I don't know if they have those up here.
For MAGA and for the country into somehow
licensing system
and now YouTube
broadcasting. YouTube, all this stuff, streaming, whatever.
FCC doesn't control YouTube in the way it controls broadcast.
It does not control cable.
Right.
It does not control streaming, and it does not control
satellite. I think right.
Nothing. The only thing that it has any control over is spectrum, which.
Sorry, I played that I think a few weeks ago. Doggone it! I played that as well. Man, I'm losing my touch. Let me see if I've got one more goodie here to share with you. Aha, here we go.
That a heretical belief does not destroy a person's soul, namely does not turn you into heretic with no share in the world to come, if you just believe it.
And this is scholar of modern Jewish thought, Marc B. Shapiro, got his PhD from Harvard.
It only does this, it only places you in the status of a heretic if your viewpoint, your heretical viewpoint,
And so he's discussing here his new book on Rav Kook, early 20th century Orthodox rabbi in Israel.
leads to actions. or leads to an understanding that will reveal itself later in actions. But as long as this heretical view is intangible, he says there is no uprooting of the faith. And he says that in this we are very close to the Ravad, Rav Avram ben David. The Ravad criticizes the Rambam. The Rambam says if you believe God has a physical form, you're a heretic. You can be a pious Jew who goes to shul 3 times a day. You're still a heretic. And the Ravad says, why are you calling him a heretic? He doesn't know any better. It's an innocent error. What we see in Rav Kook here is that while not condoning what we could term, I guess, orthopraxy, Rav Kook's position is that an observant Jew who denies basic principles of faith is to be regarded as an erring Jew, not as a heretic. It's a complete rejection of the Maimonidean approach that the religiously observant can be read out of the fold because their beliefs are in violation of certain dogmas, be it the Rambam's or others. And through this statement, he rejects the Rambam's entire conception of principles of faith, whereas denial of principles render you out of the fold. Had Tzvi Yehuda published this text, we might have been spared some of the heresy hunting in the religious Zionist world, or discussions of whether you can drink this religious Jew's wine or not because of heretical beliefs. I find this as a very significant text, not just in a theological sense, but as a halachic sense, because Rav Kook is determining halacha l'maaseh that orthoprax Jews are not to be regarded as heretics. And I've quoted this passage even before this book, and as far as I can tell, it hasn't made much of an impact, which I'm not sure. Perhaps the most striking for many people will be what I discuss in chapter 6, called Natural Morality, the Jewish Masses and Halacha. Anyone who's been to yeshiva knows that there's a certain amount of condescension that you just absorb by being there for the masses. And the traditional view in the yeshivas is that the rabbis have all the answers.
Right, so the intellectual elite in secular life, the intellectual elite in religious life, all tend to look down on the masses.
And we, including myself among the masses, we have to get everything from the rabbis. So it's a one-way street from the rabbis to us. In fact, there's an expression in yeshiva circles that goes back, I think, even to the Shachar, the Taz, I forget now, that the Das Balebatim, if you want to know what the Das Balebatim is hefech, the Das of Torah. So if you want to know what the Torah's viewpoint is, ask the average person, and then whatever he says, do the opposite. Well, Rav Kook has a completely different approach. Rav Kook speaks about something called, he terms it natural morality, Musar TV, and he tells us that natural morality is not to be found is to be found among the masses, and you find natural morality in the masses that you do not find among the scholars, and the scholars ignore it to their own detriment. What he's saying is that, and he elaborates on this, that basically, if you want to know if something's muktzah on Shabbos, or if you want to know halacha, the masses have to go to the rabbis, but the rabbis have to go to the masses. The masses preserve a natural morality. Now, where do the masses get this? And he's speaking about the masses. Think of your grandparents, maybe, who were not learned Jews, but they knew what it meant to be what Judaism was. And if the rabbi would tell them to do something in their heart they knew was wrong, they would say the rabbi doesn't know what he's talking about. The problem is, this is how I explain it, that the rabbis are so involved in Talmudic learning with its narrowness, they get involved in pilpulim. There's an expression to be mataret asheretz. To be on a Sanhedrin, you have to be able to make something non-kosher.
So pilpul refers to very tricky legal reasoning.
Kosher. That is, the rabbis can justify in their own minds all sorts of things that at the end of the day will be unethical. So they need the pious Jewish masses with this inherent religious Jewish morality that can keep them on the straight and narrow, so that the rabbis...
So this is the opposite perspective from a Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik, who valorizes the intellectual and looks down on the masses.
Don't come to unethical conclusions just by using their book knowledge. In fact, Rav Kook speaks about how book knowledge can spoil it. He says the natural people, Hanashim HaTiviyim, who were not learned, have many advantages over the learned ones, because their natural intellect and morality have not been corrupted by the mistakes that come from Talmudic learning. I mean, this is a very subversive thing when you think about it. And I understand, why people would be uncomfortable with it, that the masses, the religious masses, can have something that the rabbis don't have. And there's an element of anti-intellectualism either. It even approaches Rousseau, I think, in some of the ways that Rav Kook valorizes the masses. But it's I mean it's fascinating that Rav Kook, from Rav Kook's perspective, everyone has something to offer. You know, the rabbis have, the religious masses has, and for Rav Kook, there is an element. And where does this natural morality come from? It comes from this our conscience, I guess you could say, our internal soul. It's a form of revelation of God's word. We have revelation in the text, and we also have revelation through our sense of what the proper morality is. Rav Kook speaks about how we can't push aside our natural feelings of what is moral. Why not? Just say your natural feelings are you've absorbed something from the decadent civilization, and Rav Kook recognized that.
Right. So think about your wrist. If your wrist does everything that you want your wrist to do, your wrist is healthy. If your psyche, your physiology, your emotions, your psychology does everything that it should do, such as make you want to get closer to people who are good for you, make you want to get further away from people who are bad for you, then you are basically psychologically healthy. If your moral impulses also align with a more adaptive, a more successful way of life, then your moral impulses are also realistic and highly tuned.
There's decadence in civilization, and you know, Rav Kook, what he would do today when confronted with maybe ideas in outside which are clearly in opposition to halacha, maybe about gender identities, things like that, or perhaps in opposition to halacha, you know, homosexuality, or things like that. I wonder what Rav Kook would do with that. Would he see that there's a real conflict with halacha, or what he would make of that? Rav Kook.
So that's Marc Shapiro, one of the
Professor
more
Marc
interesting
Shapiro,
people
that Rav Kook
that we have
espoused that were
publishing today.
atypical for a rabbi living in the early part of the 20th century.
Okay, well, first, it's interesting that you say that, because I spoke on the new book a few weeks ago in London, and a Hasidic rabbi was in attendance, and he came up to me afterwards and says now he understands why the Haredim don't like Rav Kook. Look, there's a lot of ideas that I discuss in the book, which we will deal with, which they would have found problematic. But even without getting into what's in the book, some of his classic ideas. So, for instance, the idea that the irreligious have something to offer the religious. It's not just a one-way street from the religious to the irreligious. The irreligious, for instance, are the ones who understood.
And the late Rebbe of the Chabad Lubavitch movement also was open to the contributions of many different types of people. It wasn't just a matter of religious people indoctrinating the less religious.
It was time to re-enter history, as it were, who understood the need to strengthen our bodies, because to become a complete people again, we need that. The idea that we were defective for all these years in the diaspora, and that's related to Zionism, but it's more fundamental. It's the idea that the Jews' real place is the land of Israel, and without it, you're not a complete Jew. And it's precisely the irreligious Jews who recognize the call to return to history. So there's dialectic. There's the religious will give Torah, but the irreligious have something the religious don't have. Rav Kook says we forgot that our bodies are also holy. So the idea of atheism as having something positive, you know, as a makubal, everything, there's holy sparks in everything. So we have to figure out what is positive in atheism. And Rav Kook speaks about, you know, the idea that false ideas of God are being wiped away, and now we can fill it with true ideas. So these are themselves ideas which would be problematic, I think, for traditional circles. But I mean, in my book, I discuss other matters as well, which are found in his previously published books, but really come to fruition, I guess you could say, in the newly released book. So, for instance, the idea that the Jewish masses have something. We're talking about the pious masses that the religious leaders don't have. Okay? The masses see it better than the rabbis, because if your whole life is Talmud, that doesn't give you insight into the terrible cost of sexual abuse on people. There's nothing in the Gemara that will explain how devastating this is. This comes from a different place. So Rav Kook almost appears as Rousseau in some of his formulations almost. But, you know, we can point to things. Look in the Gemara. The Gemara says if you don't know what to do, go out to Pukhazi and ask the masses. Why do we go out and ask the masses? Ask the rabbis. I mean, Kol Hamon Kekol Shaddai is an expression. You see already the sages give a pride of place at certain times to the Hamon Am, the religious Hamon Am, obviously the religious Hamon Am. You know, in the days of the prophets, the majority of the Jews, it seems, worship the Baal. They don't count. And in our days, the Machalei Shabbos don't count. But among this, inspiration.
Meaning people who Mahaleh Shabbos, people who violate the laws of Shabbat, meaning Jews who violate those laws.
Even prophecy, perhaps, he mentions, of non-Jewish religious figures. And he goes even further. He says, even miracles.
So the more orthodox you get, the less likely you are to find Jews. The more traditional you get, less likely you are to find Jews who see God speaking in prophetic ways to non-Jews over, the past 2,000 years.
Even miracles they could have done. Again, this doesn't affect us. We're the highest level of religion that actually believes Judaism, but if God chose to be in contact with other figures for their communities and even gave them the ability to do certain wonders to inspire those people to live lives of...
Right. The idea that God is playing a role in other religions outside of Judaism is not one you find among many Orthodox rabbis.
Spirituality and godliness, that's not something we should reject. It doesn't concern us. It could be true, it could not be true, but it's not our concern, and we don't need to reject that out of hand. And I actually think this was a traditional view, although today people would find it strange. I went on a limb here, but I believe it's correct. You have all sorts of stories in traditional circles of Jesus doing miracles. How is Jesus doing miracles? What's going on here? Well, there's a whole book called Todos Yeshu, which goes back to the Talmudic period, which assumes Jesus did all these miracles. Of course, they explain it that he must have, had used the holy powers from the dark side or God's holy name or things like that. But we see that they actually believed, at least some of them, that he did it. And in the book, I say, this is based on the idea that if enough people claim to have seen something, maybe like a Kuzari type of argument, it has to be true. In the medieval period, Jews believed, we have writings of rabbis, that Christian saints could do wonders. But of course, it's all because they knew magic or things like that. Rav Kook comes from a different perspective, and that non-Jewish leaders could also be inspired spiritually. It doesn't affect us at all. Don't we want God to reach out to the world in all these areas and to lead people to a proper understanding of divine truth? So that's what he says. It's I think when you explain it the way I did, it loses some of its radical nature. But reading it for the first time, you're shocked because we don't have sources like this in our tradition. When Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said very similar things, the outcry was such, the declarations that what he's saying is real heresy, he was forced to withdraw the book that he wrote these matters in. He said, for instance, that God doesn't just speak to Jews. God spoke to Hindus, God spoke to Muslims, God spoke to Christians. He had to take all that out, and what's left afterwards is simply that non-Jews have the Noahide Code. That's it. That's very different than the first edition. And Rabbi Sachs would...
Noahide Code, referring to the 7 laws of the children of Noah, 7 basic moral principles that traditional Judaism expects all of humanity to abide by, such as don't murder, don't torture, don't rape, don't have homosexual sex, set up courts of law, don't be cruel to animals, don't kidnap, don't steal.
I've been very happy to know that much of what he independently was feeling was anticipated by Rav Kook. So when I said this not long ago in a talk, someone said to me, but the same people who attacked Rabbi Sachs would also have attacked Rav Kook in the exact same way for what he said. But still, at least for Rabbi Sachs, it would have been good to hear that. And maybe he would have been able to cite Rav Kook and not felt the need to withdraw in such a almost humiliating way.
I'd like to expand on it a little bit. You mentioned how had Rav Kook's position on heresy that it only is called, if someone is only called a heretic, if it leads to practice and ignoring the halacha, you said, if only we knew that in the 20th and 21st centuries before now, it could have saved a lot of the heresy hunting and saved us a lot of grief over time. Can you talk about some of the ideas of Rav Kook beyond that are important for Jews in 2025, modern Orthodox, centrist Orthodox, Dati Leumi Jews, who are looking to Rav Kook as a guide, some of the ideas that you emphasize, you think we should really emphasize that he pushed as well?
Well, I personally am very much drawn to the idea of God speaking through the religious masses. The Torah is not just the inheritance of the great Torah scholars. That Torah is everyone's, and as I said, the Gemara says, go out and see what the masses are doing, the religious masses. So I think that's something that should be stressed, and that really is in the religious Zionist world something. It's famous that when Rav Kook came out against women voting, some things that Rav Kook says. Every great thing you have to speak of enduring and transitory elements. Some aspects of Cook, I think we can agree, are transitory. How we decide that's a different question. But his idea of women voting, his opposition to it, which isn't halachic, it's more, it's not even spiritual. It's more societal. That the woman's role is in the home.
So the modesty standards among the followers of Rav Kook are intense. From a regular bloke's perspective, they would seem insane.
His role was outside. He speaks about it would destroy shalom bayis if husband and wife don't vote the same. So when he came out with this ruling, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon, the leader of the Mizrahi, said to Rav Kook, "Excuse me, Rav Kook, when it comes to halacha, we're going to listen to you, but in areas like this, we, the people, Amcha, Klal Yisrael, we can make our own decisions." And ironically, from Rav Kook's very.
So that's a little bit like the Pope. Not everything that the Pope says is treated by even the most religious Catholics as nectar from the mouth of God, right? There are rare occasions where Catholics understand the Pope is speaking for God, but not every pronouncement by the Pope is even considered by the most religious Catholics as speaking for God.
Writings, you can derive that same lesson, that not everything comes from the rabbis, and maybe in this area, Rav Maimon saw clearer that in the modern world, precisely women need to have more of a role. So I think that's very important. Of course, also the idea of a broad curriculum, particularly for the reason Rav Kook said that this was adopted by the various modern Orthodox yeshivas, not because of Rav Kook. They just recognized it on their own. I think today they'd be happy to know Rav Kook said it, that if we limit students, we're going to push them away, because not everyone is drawn to intensive Talmud study, and people need to be given other avenues to explore. And even in his more fundamental.
Right. So some people come to shul primarily to study Torah, others to talk to God, others to talk to their friends, others to volunteer in the kitchen, others to do security duty. So there are many things that will bring even the most Orthodox of Jews together.
Points about natural morality, all these areas I discuss within the book. I think for the modern Orthodox world, it's important to know about it, because many people come with ideas and come up with feelings and ideas, and if they feel that this is an opposition to Torah, then what do they need to be part of a Jewish community for? What do they need to be a Torah community? They can throw it all off. Cook shows us that many of the things that intuitively we feel really can be included in Torah. And even if I say at the end, even if we don't take Rav Kook's answers, at least he opened the door and showed us the direction, how we're supposed to go. And so in that sense, he's still a very, very important leader. Quite apart from Zionism. Obviously, Zionism is very important. And I don't want to get into now, it's Yehuda, the land, all that. When I think of Rav Kook and Zionism, I think of it in something differently. The idea that God was calling us. At the same time the non-Jews discovered nationalism, God was calling us to return to history, to return to and to become a complete people once again. The rest of the world is doing it. Now it's our time. And we are older than all these people. We used to be a complete people. For 1,800 years, 1,900 years, we were living a defective Judaism. The only way there was spirituality was through Torah study and davening. That was it. But that's because we were thrown out of the land of Israel. True Judaism, Eretz Yisrael Judaism, which was the form of Judaism that Jews were supposed to live, encompassed not just spirituality as holy, but also physicality. And Rav Kook is telling us that was so important, that once again, we will be the complete Jews that we're meant to be. And there was a reason why for 1,800 years, we only had spirituality as a way to reflect holiness, but that's not a permanent state. And that's not only an idea for the Messianic times. it's a pre-messianic time, maybe you could say, as we prepare for it. So that, I think, for me at least, is the most important idea, not about the holiness of the land and all that, but the idea that we're called once again to be complete people. So if you're in Chutzlaritz and you have a farm, let's say, that's very nice. You provide for your family, fine. But if you're in
So Chutzlaritz, that means outside the land, I believe.
Yisrael, and you have a farm, that's a holy task. That's Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael. When you, any job, when you're in the army in Eretz Yisrael, when you're fixing the streets, all this is what it means to be a complete people. And this is what it was intended when we came into the land of Israel from the desert. And then we were exiled. And now it's time to return and to be a complete Jew once again, where everyone, Rav Kook says that everyone has different talents. He says, by the way, about the nations, all nations have different talents, but among the Jewish people, we all have different talents, but we all are one unity. We come together, and that can only be
different groups have different gifts
realized in the modern era with the return to a complete Judaism. And I think Rav Kook is the prophet of this. And I'll just say one final thing. I just mentioned the word prophet, so it occurred to me. Someone asked me in a talk I recently gave, how could...
So are Messianic Jews Jews that accept Jesus? No, not necessarily. So it depends on the context. So the doctrine of the Messiah is more important for some completely traditional Orthodox Jews than for others.
Kook say all these things. Wasn't he afraid of being attacked? I mentioned this at the beginning of the book. Rav Kook sees himself as a prophetic figure. Rav Kook sees himself as the one called by God. I mean, he's not...
Right, when you feel that you are called by God, that gives you a lot of courage.
Not always sure about this. In one passage, which the Nazir censored, he wonders, am I a false prophet? But we know that a prophet has to prophesy. He can't withhold his prophecy. Rav Kook recognized that it was time for the Jewish people to reconstruct itself in a different fashion. And he has to be the one speaking this because the other rabbis aren't. And that's why I thought, without fear, he was able to chart his own direction, which we all benefit from.
And another great book I'm reading is Industrial Policy by Ian Fletcher.
In protecting the vitality of a comprehensive manufacturing ecosystem so that when technologies come along in the future that you can see are going to be very lucrative, that you have that option.
So I was asked by a friend, why do I devote so many hours to a particular volunteer position? And much of the reason is path dependent, right? A friend started a volunteer group, and on day one, I joined with my best friend. And then I got on a path, and I just keep walking on that path. Much of life is path dependent. Halakha, Jewish law, means the path. You get on a path, and then you naturally tend to progress along that same path.
Otherwise, you're just going to be watching other people do it.
So I think that actually falls under the category of your first pillar, right? Which is retaining high value industries or advantageous industries. The third pillar was currency management. I'd like to understand your thinking here, because when most people talk about foreign exchange rate management, what they really mean is devaluation, undervaluing your currency so that the export sector is more competitive. What do you mean when you talk about foreign exchange rate management, and how would that apply to the United States?
Well, currency, superficially, a strong dollar sounds like a good thing, a strong dollar for a strong America. Well, that's just a metaphor. In point of fact, the right way to think about the price of your currency is it's kind of like a person's blood pressure. You can get sick if you have blood pressure that's too high. You can also get sick if your blood pressure is too low. People usually, middle-aged adults usually worrying about high blood pressure, but you can also get sick from low blood pressure. So it's important to start by thinking about it as a parameter that needs to be optimized between not being too high or too low, not as something that, oh boy, the dollar is so strong, isn't that wonderful? Now, here's why that's important. If you have a dollar that's too strong, imports are going to be cheaper. So you get cheaper imports. Okay, that seems good. But there's a couple of problems with that. First thing is you lose export competitiveness. So every export-oriented business in the United States is going to be losing out when the dollar is too strong. Other problems with an excessively strong dollar. Well, by driving up your imports, you're going to be losing jobs in the US in the short run, and you're going to be losing the profits from whoever would have been manufacturing things in the US. And in the longer run, you're going to be losing industrial capacity, which is not just individual plants closing down, but it's the unraveling of supporting supply chains. It's the retirement and non-replacement of people with critical skill sets. And the third thing that happens when you have an excessively strong currency over a long period of time and you run a trade deficit is a trade deficit means we import more than we export. So we're taking more from the world than we give back to it. And unless we're trading with Santa Claus, you can't get something for nothing. So question is, what are we really giving? It's kind of hidden. But what we're really giving foreigners is American financial assets. That is to say, we're selling off T-bills, shares in Google, parts of a shopping center in San Diego, or some American is undertaking bank debt to some foreigner. And that, by definition, makes this a poorer country because we own less and we owe more. Now, these are all consequences of having an excessively strong currency, which is why you want an optimal currency. You want it strong enough to get cheap imports, but you don't want it so strong that you kill your exporters, you kill your domestic production, you run down your industrial base and deteriorate your net worth as a country.
So some of those cheap imports.
All right, that's the author Ian Fletcher talking about his 2025 book called Industrial Policy. I'll talk to you later.